So, I'm dictating the rules. Listen carefully. Do only your job. Don't attract attention. Don't be rude. Always wear the uniform. Don't go to the kitchen, sauna, or gym. Your presence there is not required. Cleaning in my office on Mondays and Thursdays, from 6 to 7 in the morning. Mr. Holt said dryly, sitting in his chair. Oh, and one more thing. Don't appear in the corridor after 10 in the evening. And what if I need to use the bathroom? Elle asked. Mr. Holt exhaled slowly. There's a toilet and shower in your room. Oh, sorry. Elle nodded timidly. Also, you should know that if I ever summon you to my office, you should come on time and not make me wait. The man continued. Is that clear? Yes. Please respond politely. You should say, yes, Mr. Holt. Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Holt. Then you are free, the man said. Don't forget, I'm taking you on a probationary period. Elle quickly got up from the uncomfortable chair, shook the hem of her skirt, and was about to open the door when his voice called out again. Elle, in the future, don't shake out your clothes in my office. And I would appreciate it if you said goodbye before leaving. Elle turned around, feeling embarrassed, and said, sorry. Goodbye, Mr. Holt. Goodbye, Elle. Elle breathed a sigh of relief as soon as she left the chief's office. Well, how was it? A voice immediately reached her, and she caught the gaze of a guy leaning against the wall. Awful, Elle replied. Getting on your nerves. Ha, I thought I'd die before he allowed me to leave. Can't do this. Can't do that. Can I at least breathe? SHH. Quieter. Let's move away from his office. The guy smirked, took Elle by the elbow, and slowly led her down the long corridor covered with a red wool carpet. The girl sighed resignedly, but didn't resist. After all, she would hardly be able to find her way to her room without Colin. Getting lost in endless turns, stairs, and corridors. I've long suspected I have claustrophobia, but now I'm practically sure of it. The girl complained again. Mr. Holt's office is so tight and dark. The house is huge, and he chose such a small room for his office. I could hardly breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in. I think I had a bigger room in the orphanage. You're just nervous, Colin casually tossed. The tap of Elle's black shoes echoed throughout the space. She walked and, with interest, examined paintings in golden frames hanging on the walls, heavy velvet curtains on the windows, crystal chandeliers on the ceiling. Elle quickly cooled down. The outburst of resentment was replaced by curiosity. In any case, don't worry, Colin said. Ouch. Colin suddenly began, but the girl immediately nudged him with her elbow. What for? Wait, she hissed. Do you smell that air freshener with a rose scent? At first, it seems too sweet, but then you get used to it. I don't even notice it anymore. I'm not talking about that, Colin. It's the smell of true luxury, a rich life. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I feel like an affluent lady working arm in arm with a cavalier into a private dining room. Just need to grip a long cigar with 2 fingers and take a puff. Elle comically exhaled and waved her hand, pretending to disperse smoke. Colin smiled. In all the time I've spent here, I haven't seen such ladies. Smoking is also prohibited here. By the way, they probably eat lobsters here every day, Elle said. They turned right and found themselves in a new corridor that seemed more like a greenhouse. Dozens of large pots with beautiful plants lined the walls. Dracaena, Dieffenbachia, Philodendron, Tradescantia zebrina read the wooden signs hanging in front of each pot. Elle continued to gaze at them in admiration and carefully read the names. Elle, don't worry about that old man. He may seem meticulous, but overall, he's not as strict as he appears. I've even seen him smile once. The key is not to give him a reason for conflicts. And all those prohibitions are just formalities. At least most of them. Of course, during the probationary period, he'll be more attentive to you. But afterwards, he won't care much. Just like with me and the entire staff. Eventually, you'll get used to it, and you'll start sneaking into the kitchen with the others. Well, it looks like there's a thriving criminal life here. Elle raised her eyebrows, looking at her friend. And have you joined this company? You've been working for this eccentric guy for 3 years. Of course, Colin replied. And you'll join too. You're petite. It'll be easy for you to crawl into the kitchen through the ventilation, stealing pastries. What? Elle said in disbelief. I'm just kidding. The guy chuckled. The vents here too small, but getting to the kitchen is easy even without them. The main thing is to know which entrances have cameras that don't work. The friends stepped outside, and Colin led the way down. So, have they caught anyone doing that before? Elle asked. There were a couple of incidents while I was around, but they messed up on their own. The guy grimaced. And what happened to them? Fired. Of course, there are plenty of people willing to work here. So our Mr. Riley Holt doesn't tolerate any nonsense. You, I can say, got in through connections. I had to say a few words for you, so I definitely won't be participating in that. The girl said. If this place is so hard to get into and easy to lose, I wouldn't want to be fired for some pastry. Suit yourself. But I'm almost sure you'll change your mind in a couple of weeks. You have no idea how boring it is to clean and tidy all day long, grabbing dirty napkins and washing them with your own hands. And there are 100 of them, Colin said. Holt doesn't allow them in the washing machine. Says it doesn't clean them. How much longer to my room? Elle changed the subject. Hold on. We still have a couple of stairs to climb. But you're luckier than me. My room is on the first floor. People are constantly working past the door, making noise outside. Yours is also on the first floor, but in a different wing, and in a much quieter place. There are very few staff members staying overnight here, so you shouldn't have any problems with neighbors. Colin winked. They reached Elle's bedroom in 10 minutes. The girl once again looked at the white door with excitement. Make yourself at home. Rest, but be ready at 5 tomorrow, Colin said. First working day. I'll come by for you, or you might get lost. At 5. Elle exclaimed. Life here is buzzing around 4. The guy shrugged. We go to bed early, wake up early. Usually, by 10, everyone is eagerly heading to bed. Don't frown. When I first started here, I thought I'd never get used to this routine. But now, even on weekends, I go to bed at 10. Well, for now. Colin waved his hand and headed for the stairs. Elle watched him for a few seconds, then turned around and confidently pulled the handle. The scent of freshness and clean laundry hit her nose after washing. The room was shining in whiteness. Elle stood in the middle of the room and suddenly realized that she had stepped on a fluffy white carpet. The shoes had a low heel, beautiful, matte black. Her own worn-out sneakers were found standing near the bed. Elle took off her shoes and was about to comfortably plop onto the bed, but changed her mind. She decided to first neatly arrange all her shoes in the closet. After all, in such a place, behavior should be appropriate. The closet turned out to be incredibly spacious. How much clothing must one have to fill it completely? It's okay. I'll work here for a couple of months and then buy myself a lot of new stuff, Elle said to herself. Elle's suitcase also stood against the wall. In a few minutes, she unpacked it and only then allowed herself to peacefully fall onto the soft mattress. Elle lay on the bed for a long time, gazing at herself in the glossy ceiling. This is it. A new life. She hadn't fully believed yet that she would now live in a huge mansion, even if she had to perform some duties. Even this room looked more like a luxurious suite from an expensive hotel than a maid's bedroom. All of this seemed like something out of fantasy to Elle. She grew up in an orphanage, almost knowing nothing about her real parents. She never excelled in studies, had no real friends, and teachers often scolded her for poor performance. She didn't choose the college specifically. She got into one she could. Elle realized almost immediately that all of it wasn't for her. Suddenly, She clearly understood that she would like to do something of her own for the soul, like Mr. Holt. He owned the Holt estate and was involved in breeding rare plant species and creating new ones. In his backyard, there was a huge greenhouse, tended by several dozen assistants. Elle found this work fascinating, and she would gladly work among those people rather than as a regular maid. Elle spent 3 years of her life in college before deciding to leave. One of the reasons she dragged it out was the lack of housing. The college provided a room in the dormitory, and after expulsion, she had nowhere to go. That's when Colin came to her aid. He was one of the few friends Elle had from the orphanage, but he was a year older. Right after school, he decided to earn some money and then go to college. Somehow he managed to find a place with Holt and stayed with him. They paid well here, and if you didn't have accommodation, they provided a well-furnished room. What more could you ask for? There were enough housemaids in the estate, and when one of them was dismissed, Holt had no intention of hiring anyone new. But Colin presented Elle as the most hard-working and meticulous girl he knew, and that's how she ended up in this mansion. Suddenly, Elle realized that she was lying on something. She jumped up and discovered a neatly folded dark maid's uniform underneath her. All evening, Elle had adorned herself in front of the mirror, trying on different outfits. The brown dress fit her figure perfectly. It was quite simple, but in combination with the white collar, cuffs, and shoes, the look turned out to be stylish. As she went to sleep, fear crept in. What if she did something wrong? Made a mistake? Confused things? Let Colin down? But along with this fear, somewhere inside, Elle felt joy and a pleasant excitement, heralding something unexplored and new in her life. At that time, she had no idea that this stage would become the most crucial. The sunny morning irritated Elle for the first time. The alarm forced her to get up at 4:30, and she felt completely unrested. Exactly at 5 a.m., Colin knocked on the door. Elle quickly fastened the dress, put on the shoes, and only then opened the door. All this time, the guy continued to knock. "I thought you overslept." He sighed and looked Elle up and down. "Wow, you look cool." "Thank you. So where are we going now?" "Breakfast," Elle asked. "Breakfast at 9. And for now, to work. Today, I need to change the hose in the bathroom for Holt's granddaughter," Colin said. "Holt has a granddaughter?" Elle asked. Colin nodded. "Yeah, she used to come twice a week before, but now, I think she moved in permanently. She's like the second boss here. You really need to be careful with her. Listen, don't mess up today, or I'll get a double from him." "Why double?" Elle asked. "The first one for the hose. I fixed it myself a month ago, and he scolded me and sent me to fix it again. And the second one would be for you if you mess up. After all, I said all those things about you back then, and I don't really know if you can do all this," Colin explained. "Colin, you could have asked. Couldn't you make a call?" Elle exclaimed. "And what if he assigns me to clean some pipe, and I can't do it?" "I didn't say anything about a pipe. They hired you as a housemaid, not a pipe cleaner," Colin reassured. The friends headed to the hall, turned left, went through a small door, and turned again. "I need to go the other way now," Colin said. "I'll introduce you to Mrs. Rubb, and she'll explain everything to you. Just where is she?" "We agreed on 5:10. No punctuality. And she's the boss," as if sensing it. A woman of medium height in the same uniform as Elle appeared from around the corner. "Mrs. Rubb, we were just talking about you. I already told Elle what a wonderful woman you are," Colin said. Elle smirked at him. "Wouldn't hurt to tie up your hair," Mrs. Rubb said, grabbing Elle's wrist and dragging her along. "And you, Colin, stop skipping work during working hours. Get going," she shouted. "But the workday has just begun," Elle said, but she caught the stern gaze of the woman. "Let's go. Today, you'll be washing windows on the 3rd floor all day, maybe even the entire next one." Don't you have enough windows in the mansion? The realization hit Elle. There were indeed plenty of windows. Arched, casement, sliding, panoramic. Only now did she understand how many there were, and it horrified her. Do I really have to clean all of them? It's insane. Mrs. Rubb led Elle to that same corridor with plants they worked through yesterday. Go to the laundry. Grab a bucket, cloth, and window cleaning solution. The gloves are on the shelf there. Can you handle that? And where's the laundry? Elle looked around. Right in front of us. Mrs. Rubb pointed to the nearest door. Okay, then I'll get going. Elle waved her hand. Wait, anything else? Move the flowers carefully. Don't break the leaves. And tie up your hair already. Need a tutorial on making a ponytail? Elle grimaced but tightened a tight ponytail. She disliked this hairstyle because it didn't hide her ears. She went through the indicated door and started gathering the necessary supplies. The laundry turned out to be quite spacious, filled with the scent of detergent and cleaning agents. Along the walls, a dozen washing machines were neatly arranged, each in operation, creating a humming sound throughout. Elle felt a bit nauseous from the chemical aromas, so she quickly grabbed everything she needed from the cabinet. Good Lord, where are all the buckets here? She whispered. They're right here. A voice echoed from behind the farthest washing machine, making Elle scream immediately. Who's there? A curly head with big green eyes peeked out from behind the machine. It was another girl. Who are you? Elle mumbled, realizing the absurdity of her question. The girl, like Elle, was dressed in a maid's uniform. Same question. Elle examined her curiously. Haven't seen you here before. Are you new? Sort of, Elle replied. Could you please step aside? I need to grab a bucket. Sure. Here you go. The curly stranger handed over a stack of plastic buckets. It took quite an effort to separate them, and seeing Elle struggle, the stranger suggested, give it to me. You pull the handle, and I'll take it from behind. It must have looked quite amusing from the outside. Once they finally freed a bucket, both girls found themselves on the floor. What's your name? Elle asked as the awkward silence started to linger. Asa. And yours? Elle. Well, nice to meet you, Elle. Looks like we'll be working together for a while. Assuming you don't fail the probation period. Asa offered her hand to help Elle up. You'd have to be a complete fool to fail it. But you seem like a calm person, so let's consider you part of the team already. Our Mr. Holt may seem strict, but he's a really kind-hearted person. Yeah, I already figured that out. Elle sighed. From whom? Colin told me. You probably know him. Of course, I know him, Asa replied. Actually, there are 3 Colins here. Do you know the last name of your Colin? Yeah, Bostick. Bostick. Well, how are you related to each other? Nobody. Just old friends. I ended up here thanks to him. Do you talk to him? I dated him for 2 months last year. Really? Why did you break up? If it's not a secret, the entire estate knows the reason, even Holt. I come from a highly educated family. Both parents are professors, and Colin is the most illiterate person I've ever known. Advice just doesn't work. I wasn't about to date an illiterate guy who doesn't respect my principles. Plus, he kisses strangely. So, after breaking up with him, I didn't regret a thing. Elle nodded thoughtfully. Nightmare. You've got dramas here. How about your current relationship with him? Elle didn't really know why she was asking all this. In the time she hadn't seen Colin, it felt like she had completely forgotten about him, and now she was grasping at any information related to him. However, Asa seemed to interpret this curiosity in her own way. Tense, to be honest. The girl blushed. So, if anything, don't worry. I don't mind. Not mind what? Well, if something's going on between you two, better not tell him that I shared all this with you. And by the way, I didn't mean it when I said he kisses poorly. So, give it a try if you want. You might like it. No, I already said we're just friends. And why were you sitting here? By the way, Hiding from someone. Elle laughed. Elle thought it would be best to change the subject quickly. Yeah, Asa said. Playing hide and seek with my partner. Seeing Elle's puzzled expression, the girl continued, if you think I'm joking, I'm not. I'm dead serious. It's another separate story. Shall we go to the corridor? Relieved to leave the laundry room, Elle followed Asa. You see, Elle, sometimes he at Holt's, guests, his colleagues, biologists, lose things. Quite valuable ones, actually. I've heard all scientists are a bit absent-minded. In his castle, of course, it's hard to get lost. But the fact remains. And we, the maids, are the ones who have to look for all these lost items. The same thing happened now, so Paige Wood and I were sent to find a lost precious ring. You understand, checking every room and every corner of the entire mansion is very difficult and time-consuming. So, we play hide and seek while simultaneously searching for the jewelry. The girl explained, smartly devised. And does this happen often? Elle asked. It happens occasionally. Although lately, things have been disappearing quite frequently. Either people visiting Holt have become more inattentive, or we've got a thief. And these rumors are starting to gain popularity. Mark my words, in a month, everyone will be talking about the imaginary thief. And what if it's not imaginary? Elle asked. Have you ever found the missing items? Paige and I haven't. I don't know about others. We're always assigned different tasks. Why didn't you fill the bucket with water? Oh, right. Never mind. Bring it here. I'll quickly fill it myself. Asa snatched the bucket from the girl's hands and disappeared back into the laundry room. Another maid emerged from around the corner. Quickly scanning the area, she fixed her gaze on Elle and approached. Could you not come my way? Please. I haven't done anything yet. Elle panicked, but the maid stopped right in front of her and asked, Hey, have you seen a curly-haired girl around here? Goes by the name of Asa. Elle sighed and shook her head. Okay, the disappointed maid said. If you see her, let me know. I've been looking for her for 40 minutes now. With those words, the girl turned and continued walking. When Asa came out of the laundry room with a full bucket of water, Elle immediately informed her, I think I just saw your Paige. I saw her too. Through the door crack. She's circling around here for the third time. Still hasn't checked the laundry room once. She's been looking for you for 40 minutes. No worries. Let her run around a bit more. I once couldn't find her for 3 hours. Elle carefully circled a large, peculiar tree and splashed glass cleaning liquid. The window didn't seem very dirty, but she didn't have much choice, so she started polishing it. Outside, there spread a vast green garden where several gardeners were working. Elle once again caught herself thinking how great it would be to work with them. Don't underestimate this place, Asa remarked, sitting on the windowsill. She also gazed at the garden. The estate is just enormous, and it's never empty. There's always plenty to do. Of course, there's only one owner, but besides him, there are many residents in the mansion. The West Wing is basically Holt's home for him and his children. The South Wing houses various important guests who gather for discussions on their scientific matters. The East Wing contains all the specialized rooms for these discussions, and the North Wing has various recreational facilities like a pool, golf course, and a gym. That's why there's more staff here than in hotels. I'm sure of it. Asa took a deep breath and continued. I heard that this estate used to be a museum, then a private school, and only later it somehow ended up in Holt's hands. I thought it belonged to the Holt family for ages. Elle said, No, definitely not. Such things don't happen in our world anymore. There's a rather murky history with this estate. Holt and his family actually have a different last name. Holt is just a pseudonym adopted to avoid unwanted inquiries. I've been working here for less than an hour, and I've already learned all the gossip. Elle chuckled. It's all nonsense. Asa replied. There are some individuals here who genuinely believe that spirits are introduced into the mansion, like in any old building. Supposedly, These spirits extract valuable belongings from the guests. I thought ancient spirits would protect their homes, not try to harm the owner. Elle said. Well, they've come up with an explanation for that too. Asa motioned for Elle to come closer, looked around, and whispered in her ear. They say that Mr. Holt, in his time, seized everything and ruthlessly dealt with the true owner of the estate. So, the restless soul, consumed by the thought of revenge, can't ascend to the sky and is trapped within the walls of this mansion, she said ominously. It suffers, wanders everywhere, scares anyone in its path, and at night, it howls in the dark corridors or whispers incomprehensible things to people in their sleep. Asa straightened up and locked eyes with Elle. They both stared at each other anxiously for a few seconds, and then burst into laughter. Well, that's horrifying, Elle exclaimed through laughter. Who comes up with all this? Mostly our gardener, Mr. Knight. He's a master at it. Always telling everyone something, uttering complete nonsense. But it's so interesting. She chatted with Asa for another 20 minutes until Asa finally decided to go look for her friend. Until 9, Elle was alone washing windows. To her surprise, such a beautiful corridor mostly remained empty. Only closer to breakfast, Mrs. Robb reappeared and led Elle to the dining room. Breakfast at 9, lunch at 2, dinner at 7. Got it, the woman said sternly. Can I take off this rubber band already? Elle replied. No. To Elle's disappointment, the dining room served the most ordinary food. No lobsters, just oatmeal and flakes to choose from. Elle opted for flakes and had breakfast in the company of strangers because she still couldn't find Colin. Apparently, poor guy still hadn't figured out the shower. Mrs. Robb had disappeared somewhere, so Elle had to find her way back on her own. She quickly ran through the familiar route, but when she was supposed to be in the right corridor, she found herself in a completely unfamiliar hall. Elle must have made a mistake. Chandeliers bathed the hall in warm light. A fluffy white carpet covered the floor. A shiny piano stood against the wall, and a round stool on wheels next to it was spinning rapidly. Apparently, someone had just jumped off it and disappeared behind the door in the corner of the room. Voices could be heard from there, and they were raised. The speakers seemed to be arguing. I'm not going to stay here for a whole week. Dad, someone, obviously a girl, exclaimed. How do you imagine that? Perfectly normal. I don't see a problem with it, replied the second, more restrained voice. And now, please, go back to the room and finish playing the scale. There's not even furniture there, and the door doesn't have a lock. I won't move for anything. A week. Just 1 week. Erin, they'll bring you a bed and all the necessary furniture. Why is it so hard to cooperate and endure a bit? Because it's unbearable. It's my room, which I personally chose. So why should I move to some other one? Protested the first voice. If you want to stay in the flooded bedroom, go ahead. Why can't you remove all the water now while I'm in class? Oh God. Erin, first, because it's a flood. Do you understand what it means to burst a pipe? Most likely, we'll have to install a new radiator. Second, the shower in your room is also not working now. Many parts need to be replaced. Erin, please, don't behave like a child. Elle remembered Colin again, who went to fix the shower for Holt's granddaughter in the morning. At that moment, she immediately thought that the girl behind the door was the said granddaughter, and the pipe burst right in her room. Elle should have left. Eavesdropping on other people's conversations probably wasn't part of the maid's duties. Just when she was about to leave, the door swung open, and a 15-year-old girl stormed into the hall. Then I declare a hunger strike. She angrily tossed her golden hair and declared, I'll lock myself in my room, and you won't get me out. I'd rather sit in the water than with you. Oh, this teenage age, Elle said to herself. Erin turned and headed straight towards the chambermaid, and upon encountering her, screamed in horror. Dad, there's someone here, she exclaimed, concerned. The father, a man with long light mustaches, immediately appeared behind the girl and demanded an explanation. Did Mr. Holt send you? Do you have something to convey? He asked. Come on. Don't stay silent. No. Elle replied, frightened. I was just going to wash the windows. You couldn't have been sent here for cleaning. The man said. My daughter's class is happening here. Did you eavesdrop? The girl sarcastically inquired. If so, I'll call my grandpa. And you'll be fired. Oh, it turns out she's really Holt's granddaughter. We should be careful with her. Recent words of a friend echoed in the girl's mind. I wonder what kind of person Erin is. So far, she seems like a simple, capricious teenager. Elle looked at her with interest, and suddenly the girl's appearance seemed very familiar to her. Erin took out her phone and gave a warning glance to the chambermaid. The father, it seemed, had no intention of stopping her. The prospect of being fired on the very first day was not appealing, so Elle soon clarified the situation. Sorry, it's my first day here, so I got a bit lost. I didn't mean to disturb you, really. Elle timidly shifted her gaze from the daughter to the father. He remained silent for a while and then spoke skeptically. First day, you say? All right then. Just try to remember your way better from now on. Do you need me to guide you? No, thank you. I can manage myself. The girl sighed. She turned to leave, but it wasn't that simple. Erin suddenly grabbed her dress sleeve, almost tearing it. Wait. Your face seems familiar to me. Haven't you worked here before? Elle couldn't explain this déjà vu feeling when looking at Erin. However, it seemed rough as the girl forcefully pulled her. No, I haven't worked here, Elle said. Could you please let me go? Dad, she's lying. I usually don't remember the faces of chambermaids, but I definitely remember this one. Erin tightened her grip on Elle's wrist. Why do you think that if you've seen me before, I must have worked here? Couldn't we have met somewhere else? Elle asked. Erin fell into thought. Erin, stop bothering the chambermaid, her father sternly said. Sit down and finish your scales. I just want to know why she's eavesdropping. Miss, I apologize. You can go. No, stay. Dad, don't forget, I'm on a hunger strike, so the lesson is cancelled. Erin stated, putting her father in a predicament. We'll talk with Elle in my room. Erin declared. Wait, how do you know my name? The bewildered chambermaid asked. I remembered who you are, Erin replied, dragging the chambermaid along. Erin left her father puzzled alone. Sorry, but I have a task to complete, whoever I may be. Elle barely kept up with Erin, who was harshly pulling her sleeve. If you had a task, you wouldn't be wandering around aimlessly, Erin retorted. Do you even know where you've entered? No, I don't. I already explained that I don't know anything here yet. And why are you so rude to me and your dad? He just wants to help you. Eavesdropping. Ha. Erin snapped, but Elle continued undisturbed. And you should talk to me respectfully too. Like with a stranger and an older person. I don't owe anyone anything. Elle didn't notice how they entered the western wing, a part of the mansion where the Holt family lived. This part of the mansion looked quite cozy and lived in, indicating real people reside here. I probably won't find my way out from here on my own, Elle thought. I wonder what she recognized in me. What if she's trying to set me up? Unfortunately, Elle's thoughts weren't too far from the truth. The girl stopped in front of a beautiful white door covered in stickers and posters. Water was seeping from under the door. At the sight of this scene, Erin uttered a few strong curses. Elle was astonished at how much a person's appearance and character can mismatch. Erin looked like a little angel with big blue eyes, golden hair, and pink lips, which, as it turned out, could utter quite indecent things. Okay, let's talk right here. The girl leaned against the windowsill and looked at Elle. I don't understand what you want from me. Elle honestly replied. You're from orphanage number 2, right? Erin asked. Elle's eyes widened. How do you know all this? I used to live near that place, constantly played on the playground with the kids from the orphanage. Came there for years. Don't you remember me? I played with many kids on the playground. Elle said. Do you remember the girl you dunked face first into a puddle? Only now Elle realized why this girl seemed so familiar to her. I remember. But she deserved it. Erin remained silent for a long time. Elle could only hear her slow breathing. I remember you for life. Erin finally said with a trembling voice. It was the biggest humiliation of my life. But I always knew karma exists. How great that now you are my servant. The girl waited for a response, but Elle remained unresponsive. So Erin continued, let everyone think I'm vengeful. But now I'll do everything to turn your job into hell. Erin's face regained a calm expression. I have no reason to listen to you, Elle said. I got this job through your grandfather, and I'll only follow his orders. You have no idea how easy it is to deal with this problem, Erin said. Elle wasn't too concerned about Erin's revenge plans. She had much more important matters to attend to at the moment. But Erin's words bothered her slightly. What could she be planning? In Elle's thoughts, a vivid picture from the past emerged. She grabs Erin by her golden hair and angrily drags her through a cold, muddy puddle. A crowd of onlookers stands nearby, watching with disgust but not daring to intervene. Drink, Elle shouted then. How does it taste? Delicious. At that time, Elle was around 15, and Erin was 10. Elle often joined the kids on outings, but occasionally stayed on the sidelines. Erin, too, would come to the playground where the orphanage kids played. She claimed her parents sent her there to socialize with kids of a different status and learn to appreciate what she had. In reality, Elle, who was already a mature girl, understood that Erin came to the playground only to boast and belittle the orphans. Almost casually, she would say hurtful things about everyone, wearing the most expensive clothes and parading in front of envious eyes. If she found out about someone's dream among the orphans, the very next day Erin would bring that thing and flaunt it in front of the child, manipulating and even threatening someone at times. All of this would happen with the sweetest smile on her face. In short, this girl was a real torment for the poor orphans. The caregivers tried to talk to her, ask for her mom's phone number, but Erin continued to show up on the playground. Elle, observing all of this, had long noted to herself that words were powerless against this person. She wasn't a rebel, but sometimes she felt the urge to give that smug face a good slap. The tipping point came with a particular incident. Among the orphans was a little girl named Pam, who had recently ended up in the orphanage. Her parents had died in a car accident, leaving the child in a very distressed state. Once, she mentioned that she used to have a puppy, which her family got shortly before the tragic event. Her mom had dreamed of having a dog, but unfortunately, she didn't get to be the owner for long. After the accident, the puppy was sent to a shelter. Pam said that she wanted to adopt him once she left the orphanage because he would always remind her of her mom. Erin couldn't resist eavesdropping on that conversation. A couple of days later, she showed up with a newborn puppy. Elle found herself witnessing a horrifying scene as Erin called little Pam over and said something like, "Look, I found your puppy," then sat down and started drowning the little one in a puddle. She rubbed the puppy on the dirty asphalt, splashing it with muddy water, while it whimpered plaintively. Pam cried and begged her to stop. The little girl's pleas had no effect on Erin. Such a sight would hurt not only the child. Therefore, Elle didn't hesitate for a moment, rushed towards the tormentor, and dunked her in the puddle. Perhaps that act was the cruelest in Elle's life, but she had never regretted it. She still vividly remembered Erin's scratched, dirty face, numerous insults hurled at her through tears. It was the last time Erin was seen on the orphanage playground. Even the caregivers barely punished Elle for that act. The puppy was taken in by the caretaker, and the story eventually faded into oblivion. And now, Erin stood before Elle again, with that same sweet smile with which she once drowned a defenseless animal. She continued to say something, but Elle wasn't listening at all. "And if you refuse or decide to resist, I'll make sure you lose this job, Erin said. Elle didn't doubt that Erin could do it. However, she hoped it wouldn't come to that, and that Holt would be fair to his employees. Sure, you have nowhere to go. You're an orphan, the girl said sarcastically. People don't change. You're so unpleasant. A spoiled child who has been given everything since childhood. Elle turned and walked away. That's Elle for you. She hadn't worked a day, and already she found herself in trouble. It seems the next 2 weeks will be eventful, she thought, feeling a strange sadness settling inside her. What a coincidence. The last thing she wanted was to deal with the blonde tormentor again. If Elle happens to dunk her in the asphalt again, this time it's unlikely she'll get away with it. She was led to the required greenhouse on the 3rd floor by some kind old man. Erin didn't encounter her for the rest of that day. Unfortunately, the joy of the day ended there. When Elle, exhausted after a long workday, returned to her room, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a call from Colin. Hello, Elle said anxiously. Colin, where are you? Why didn't you show up? I'm lying in the hospital, her friend replied. What? Colin, what happened? Today, the pipe burst at Holt's granddaughter's place. Did you hear about it? It was a mess there. Yes, I heard. But how did you end up in the hospital? I was trying to fix the shower, tweaking something, though I realized it wouldn't change anything. I struggled with it for about an hour. Then I got all sweaty. It was stuffy in the bathroom. Colin, can we get to the point? Elle urged him. I turned off the battery, fiddled with it a bit more. But in the end, I decided to tell Holt that I couldn't do anything about it. I'm not a specialized plumber. Before leaving, I remembered about the water being turned off. I turned it back on, and then scalding water gushed out. I leaped to the side and hit my head on some metal thing. I barely made it out of the room. My legs got burned. I have a bump on my head. The doctors say it's a concussion. And what about your legs? Can you work? 2nd-degree burns, he replied, covered in blisters. I'll have to spend 2 weeks in the hospital, so you'll have to manage without me for a while, as long as you're okay. Which hospital are you in? On Steel Avenue. I'll come tomorrow if they let me. Elle promised. Sure, I'll be waiting. Her friend chuckled. And how did Holt react? What did he say? I hope he didn't blame you. No, quite the opposite. He came, apologized, said he would compensate for the situation. The estate is very old, and its plumbing is from the same era. I'm definitely not to blame for the burst. Maybe the estate is in a critical condition overall, and it's dangerous to be in it. First, the plaster falls off, then pipes burst. What's next? In my opinion, he should have long thought about why everything in his building constantly breaks down, Colin said. He has a different last name, Elle mused, recalling Ossa's words. Holt is a pseudonym. I don't care, but I wouldn't want to find myself in such a situation again, especially since his granddaughter lived in that room. And it could have been her in my place. I wish it were her, Elle said. Well, where do these thoughts about Erin come from? Colin exclaimed. I had an unpleasant conversation with her today, Elle replied, on the very first day. Well, you're something. I've had a few of those with her too. She's an awfully malicious girl. Whatever you do for her, everyone is dissatisfied. So I usually try to avoid her. What did you do to displease her, Colin? She's the one who drowned the puppy back then. When? What puppy? Colin didn't understand. Colin rarely sat in the courtyard. Most of the time, he played football with friends during his free time. That's why Erin didn't leave a lasting impression on him during those years. Throughout the 3 years of working on the estate, he never realized it was her. The story from the orphanage when I bathed a girl in a puddle because she drowned a puppy in it. Elle said, Come on, are you sure? Colin said, astonished. Unfortunately, Elle sighed. Well, Elle, you're in for a tough time, Colin said. Of course, it couldn't be said that Erin's threats didn't scare her at all. If any other child had said this to her, Elle would have been curious about what they would come up with. However, Erin was the granddaughter of Elle's boss, and that changed some things. Colin himself mentioned that Holt Smoot could depend on this girl. As it turned out, she skillfully manipulated all the adults. Elle really didn't want her fate to be in Erin's hands. Elle fell asleep with mixed feelings. Several hours had passed since lights out, and she was still tossing and turning in bed. Perhaps the cause was fatigue. So much had happened today, and it was only the first day of work. What awaited her next? Before falling asleep, the girl suddenly felt very lonely. This feeling sometimes came to Elle, so she learned to cope with it. However, at such moments, it seemed like she was completely alone in this world. She wanted to feel needed and important to someone at least once in her life. Lean on the shoulder of someone close, like a mother she didn't even know, and just have a heart-to-heart talk. I wonder where her parents are now. What happened to them? Did they ever think about her in these almost 20 years? Elle knew only one fact about her mother. Elle came into her life when she was only 17. The girl didn't know if that could be an excuse for her mother's actions. Days passed one by one, with Elle receiving tasks every morning, which she diligently carried out. Several times, she was even allowed to visit Colin. She began to chat more often with Asa and Paige, and also got acquainted with the kind concierge, Mrs. Monaghan. So a week went by. There was still no news from Erin, which couldn't help but please Elle. In short, Elle finally relaxed completely. Apparently, Erin's threats turned out to be empty intimidations. However, that opinion had to change when she was summoned to Holt's office on a Sunday morning. Walking into the office, Elle immediately encountered Holt's grim face. "Hello, Mr. Holt," she greeted politely. He just nodded briefly, pointing to the chair. "What do you think our conversation today will be about?" he rasped. "I don't know," she said. Holt nervously began to smooth his beard and paced slowly around the dark office. "You don't know? Huh? Remind me, Elle, of the first rule I dictated to you." "I don't remember," Elle stammered. She fell silent, but Holt persistently awaited an answer. "To do your job," she decided to guess. "Exactly. To do your job diligently." Elle panicked, trying to recall where she might have slipped up. But the boss's next words put everything in its place. "How do you think, Elle, does eavesdropping on other people's conversations fall under your job responsibilities?" The walls began to close in on Elle again, and she took a deep breath. "No, it doesn't," she replied. "Then why do you do it?" "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Don't pretend not to understand." Holt suddenly lunged at the girl and stared at her with a piercing gaze. "You've only been working here for a week, and complaints have already been filed against you. Many people have been working here for several years, and not a single complaint has been filed against them. And you," he stepped back and said calmly, "tell me, dear, the third rule that I specifically laid out for you." And silence hung in the air again. "Don't remember? Then I'll remind you. The third rule is not to be rude. Such a simple rule, isn't it? But apparently not for you. Why are you silent? Give me your comments on what happened." "What's there to say?" Elle thought. "If you don't care anyway, you probably believe your granddaughter." However, she spoke aloud. "Listen, it was an accident. You accidentally offended Erin." "No, I mean eavesdropping. I just got lost and unintentionally overheard that conversation. They made up things themselves, claiming that I was deliberately trying to find something out. I swear, it's not true. And as for rudeness, Erin was the one who started threatening me." "Threatening?" Holt chuckled. "I can believe the first part, but threatening the maid? And why? Tell me, did she need to do that? Do you even hear what you're saying?" "We have some old scores," Elle said. Apparently, Holt was skeptical of her words, but he responded, "Even if that's the case, you understand that you're at work. You're a maid who has no right to be rude to anyone, especially not to me or my family. Understand who you are dealing with, or else you risk being fired. I ask you to leave all your old scores outside my estate. I don't mind, Elle said. Just please make sure your granddaughter won't bother me either. Sort that out yourselves. The man replied, It's not my concern. But my concern is to choose a suitable punishment for you. What do you think? What punishment do you deserve? Elle shrugged. Surely, he was asking this just to torment her. And the punishment was already prepared. I'll have you clean up the attic for a few days. There's plenty of cleaning to be done there. And I'll personally ensure that you complete all the assigned work. If you don't finish on time, I'll extend the punishment. The attic hasn't been cleaned in a long time. Okay, Mr. Holt. Elle still didn't fully grasp the complexity of her punishment. She had never been to the attics of mansions before, and it was bound to be quite eerie up there. For some reason, Us's ghost story about the estate's original owner, trapped within the walls of the house, whispering in dark corridors and frightening everyone, came to mind. To be honest, you initially made a very good impression on me, but now you've greatly disappointed me, stated Holt. However, your punishment is a second chance. I did a big favor by not firing you immediately, and you should be very grateful for that. I really don't want to believe that such a nice girl like you could treat her job and the people around her this way. You knew Erin is my granddaughter, yet you still interacted with her like that. By doing so, you offended not only her but also me. You should better focus on the upbringing and moral standards of your granddaughter. Elle almost blurted out. She didn't want to risk losing her job over a single remark, although she would have gladly exposed Erin's true nature to Holt. Apologies, Mr. Holt. From now on, I'll try to be more mindful of my words, she said instead. As soon as Holt released her, Elle bid farewell and left the office. After breakfast, Mrs. Robb approached her and led her to the 4th floor. The woman, who had recently been strict with Elle, now empathized with her. Don't worry, Elle. Erin can turn anyone against themselves. You better steer clear of her next time, she advised. They stopped in a dark corner where the bright light barely penetrated. Mrs. Robb brought out a tall ladder, set it up, climbed and secured it. She went up first, opening the attic. Mrs. Robb disappeared into the darkness, calling out to Elle from the other end of the attic. Come on, I'll show you what to do. Clutching a long mop and a bucket filled with water, Elle awkwardly climbed the ladder. An unpleasant smell of staleness and dust hit her nose. She cautiously followed Mrs. Robb. The rotting planks beneath her feet creaked loudly. Colin was right. All the beauty and grandeur of this estate were just a golden shell. Inside, it was very ancient and dilapidated. The attic was a prime example, a completely undeveloped, bare framework of a space, exposing all its flaws. In contrast to the rest of the house, this place was even intimidating. Darkness thickened in the corners, and in the silence, one could hear something dripping from the ceiling. Perhaps, with thorough renovation, this could turn into a decent attic space, thought Elle. You could have a proper floor and install lighting. Mrs. Robb stood by the wall and gestured along it. After a couple of seconds, a click sounded, and the attic was illuminated with a dim orange light. So, start by mopping the floors everywhere. When you move to another room, turn on the light. The switch will be on the same wall as here. There are several rooms here, Elle exclaimed, shocked. And what did you think? The attic actually spans the entire area of the building. There are exactly 12 rooms here. Elle nearly fell in place. She thought she would finish mopping the floors by lunchtime and move on to the next task. Don't worry. Some rooms are slightly smaller than this one, Mrs. Robb reassured her. When you finish mopping the floor, start cleaning the windows. After that, take a broom and sweep away the dust everywhere. That's your entire task. Okay. How much time do I have for all this? 2 days, the woman replied. But Mr. Holt allowed extending the deadline if needed. After bidding farewell to Mrs. Robb, Elle immediately got to work. She had prepared for this moment, so she had headphones in the pocket of her apron. Tuning into some light melody, Elle, like Cinderella, whirled around in a waltz with the mop. After a couple of hours, the first room was ready. Elle cleaned several more rooms, not keeping track of how many she had already scrubbed. She simply moved from one place to another. Fatigue was barely noticeable, even though it was already evening. Nevertheless, entering another room, Elle decided to take a short break. She turned off the music in her headphones and sat down on a chest. There were many cardboard boxes along with them by the walls. Elle embraced the mop and stared thoughtfully at the floor, breathing slowly. Elle started examining the room. Maybe she hadn't paid attention before, but for some reason, this room seemed different, unlike all the others. A bright beam of evening sunlight streamed through a small window. Old yellowed newspapers were scattered everywhere. It wasn't scary at all. It was rather cozy. This place was imbued with a strange atmosphere. Elle stood up, walked to the window, and ran her finger along the dusty sill. She opened the window to let some fresh air into the stuffy space. Distant voices could be heard from the street. Elle squatted down and began picking up the newspapers from the floor. The Herald, the official city newspaper. The girl read, "Issue number 17, 1956. Wow, these papers are over half a century old." Elle sifted through them with interest, examining the black and white photos. They depicted portraits of different people, beautiful streets, buildings, and even animals. The girl couldn't help but smile while looking at a boy with a fluffy kitten on his shoulder. Jesse Lawson, a student at St. Patrick's School, on March 29, saved the kitten Peach from the hands of animal abusers. The abusers tried hard. Peach had its tail chopped off, ears singed, and a broken leg. Jesse not only stole and rescued the defenseless animal, but also personally cared for it for a whole month until the kitten was completely healthy. Now, Peach happily lives with Jesse and his parents. We should all take an example from Jesse. There was a whole pile of newspapers. Elle couldn't read them all. She didn't even notice that she had spent almost half an hour looking through them. Finally, the girl came to her senses, jumped up, hugging the stack of papers. No time to rest. She won't get anything done that way. Elle abruptly threw the newspapers on the chest and was about to grab the mop, but she noticed that a few papers, apparently newspaper clippings, had flown out of the stack. The maid sighed and began crawling on the floor, picking them up. Mostly, these were some notes from the texts, but there were also photos, such as, "Wait, stop a moment." Elle even shook her head, bringing the picture closer. She held a photo of a girl in a beautiful, lavish dress, white gloves on her hands, holding an expensive cigar between her fingers. She looked exactly as Elle described the image of the affluent lady on her first day at the estate. The girl in the photo had a very expressive, slightly mocking gaze. The problem was one. This girl was Elle. At least, she looked exactly like our heroine. Elle stared at the photo with a puzzled expression for a long time. She ran her chilled fingers over the picture. Someone once told her that all our thoughts are material. Yes, she used to occasionally imagine herself in such luxurious and pompous outfits, but she never thought her visions would materialize. What kind of tricks were these? Could such a thing be possible? Could she be the actual double of a completely unfamiliar person from the past? The first thing that came to Elle's mind was to find the newspaper from which this photo was cut and read the accompanying record. After a couple of minutes, this endeavor seemed very foolish to her. It was simply impossible to locate the required newspaper. Then Elle gently, so as not to tear the thin newspaper paper, put the cutout in her pocket and stood indecisively in the middle of the empty room for a while. She decided to get back to work and think about the portrait a little later. However, after that, the work didn't progress. Mopping the floors seemed incredibly tedious, and her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious discovery. Maybe it's really me in the photo. Who knows, maybe in a couple of years, they'll invent a time machine, and I'll travel back in time and end up in the newspaper. Various thoughts crossed Elle's mind, including incredible conjectures. However, after finding the photo of her doppelganger, even Ossa's ghost stories didn't seem so absurd. But could such a resemblance exist? Biological sisters aren't always so strikingly similar, and the girl in the photo was entirely unknown to Elle, living in a different millennium. Elle suddenly froze. Why consider her a stranger? After all, she knew nothing about her relatives. It was entirely possible that the lady in the photo was some distant ancestor of hers. After this thought, working became unbearable for Elle. She tossed the mop aside and paced back and forth in the room. For the first time, she genuinely wanted to know who her parents were. Not just daydream about them before bedtime, as she always did, but truly find them, get to know them, inquire about other relatives. She couldn't understand how she lived so calmly without this information before. Maybe back then, she didn't want to disappoint herself, as her parents could have been anyone. Or perhaps she feared discovering that she was indeed an accident, an unwanted child. What else could she expect, knowing her mother was a 17-year-old teenager? But now, for some reason, all of this was overridden by different, new, and more pleasant thoughts. What if her parents did love her after all? Perhaps she ended up in the orphanage not by their choice, but due to unfortunate circumstances. Somewhere deep inside, Elle understood that hoping for such things was foolish. After all, she was no longer a little child. However, the thought that her true blood relatives might still be out there, the thought that she wasn't alone in this world, drowned out the sensible voice within. Can't an adult person hope for a miracle at least once? In that newspaper photo, it was as if she saw her real relative for the first time, and she really liked that feeling. Elle would have probably finished cleaning all the rooms by now. However, due to a small piece of paper, she got stuck and couldn't focus on anything else. Eventually, about 40 minutes later, she became frustrated with herself, plugged her headphones back in, and resumed cleaning. The next day, Elle completed all the assigned tasks. Even Holt was pleasantly surprised. For some reason, he was convinced that the girl would need additional time. At his age, and as far as Elle knew, Mr. Holt was well into his 70s. He couldn't or perhaps didn't want to climb up to the attic. Therefore, he entrusted Mrs. Rubb with evaluating Elle's work. The woman worked around for a long time, carefully inspecting every corner. She even found a couple of nuances to nitpick. However, she reported to the boss that Elle had done the job perfectly. And then, the next morning brought a wonderful day. It was wonderful because it was Elle's only day off, occurring once every 10 days. On her day off, she decided to allow herself to sleep in until 7. When she woke up, instead of waiting for breakfast, she threw on a light windbreaker and rushed outside. The sunny August morning couldn't help but bring joy. Numerous colorful cars were zooming down the road, the bright sun reflecting off their windows. Elle was even surprised by how early life was buzzing on the streets. Trees grew along the sidewalk. A janitor swept the asphalt in their shade, where the first yellowing leaves had already appeared. More than a week had passed. Colin reported feeling much better. He still couldn't work as his legs were covered in blistering burns. However, he was full of vitality. Colin assured Elle that he could persuade the nurse to allow a short visit. So, Elle stood in the waiting area, dancing a bit with 2 cups in her hands. She expected someone to come for her soon and escort her to the room. However, she was very surprised to see Colin wheeling in on a wheelchair. "Don't worry, it's temporary," he said, noticing her bewildered expression. "I need to get around somehow." "Oh, coffee. Thanks." Elle handed him the cup and sat down next to him. She looked closely at Colin. Overall, he looked lively, but a huge scratch on his forehead was somewhat unsettling. "Hey, Colin, do you believe in the theory that everyone on Earth has a doppelganger?" she asked. "Maybe, maybe not." He shrugged. "You've got some strange questions going on." "Well, What do you think? Elle continued questioning. I've never really thought about it, replied Colin. Why suddenly these thoughts? I'm just wondering. What if, for example, I have a double somewhere in the world? Or had one before? She mused. Yes, I know how it sounds. But we can't know for sure. Yeah, maybe they clone everyone in factories. Colin chuckled, and Elle realized he didn't take her words seriously. She then put the coffee aside and rummaged in her small bag. Pulling out a newspaper photo, Ellen folded it and handed it to Colin. How about this? Colin looked at the paper with interest, held it up to the light, and rotated it. What's this? He finally asked. It's me, said Elle. Yeah, I see it's you, nodded Colin. When did you have a photo shoot? Were you a model? What photo shoot? Colin, I found this picture in the attic while serving my punishment, exclaimed Elle. It's a cutout from a newspaper, about 70 years old. Colin was silent for a couple of seconds. So, you mean? He began. Elle nodded. Yes, this girl lived in the last millennium. But she's a copy of me. Colin frowned, looking intently at Elle from the past. Then it would be more accurate to say that you're her copy, he said. Is that the only thing that caught your attention in my words? Of course not. He placed the portrait of the girl from the past next to Elle's face and squinted one eye. This is a matrix glitch, he exclaimed, astonished. Elle, are you aware that there are scientists studying reincarnation? You know, past lives, rebirth. Maybe it could seem that way to them. Colin, don't talk nonsense. Elle waved it off. The only logical explanation I can find is that the girl in the photo might be a relative of mine. That's possible too, but I doubt we can figure it out. You have no connections with your family. But honestly, I'd be very interested to learn more about this girl. Listen, you said this photo is from a newspaper. Have you tried finding the place it was cut from? There must be something about her written there. I tried, but there are tons of those newspapers, and I didn't have much time. Then bring them to me. I'm dying of boredom here. Might as well do something productive. I don't think they'll just let me into the attic. Elle shook her head. Tell them you forgot something while cleaning, Colin suggested. Say it's some pile of old newspapers. Do you think they won't notice? I almost got fired already. And if Holt says I'm a thief too, I'm not going to sneak in there at night. Elle said. Listen, they've been gathering dust there for many years and no one ever needed them. It's not theft. If you want, tell Mrs. Monaghan that there's a Save the Forest campaign in town, and with this waste paper, we'll save many trees. She's so compassionate. She'll believe it for sure. Elle sighed. Fine, I'll try talking to her. Colin was right. The trick worked perfectly. Mrs. Monaghan inspected the newspapers and handed Elle a full stack. The concierge assumed that they were probably used to cover the attic floor before. During lunch, Elle sent the papers by taxi to the hospital, where Colin was supposed to pick them up. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. The days in anticipation stretched long and dull. Well, not entirely dull. That's because Erin reappeared. Apparently realizing that acting through her grandfather was not the most successful option, she switched to open aggression. At first, it was harmless, like notes with strange threats under Elle's door every morning or fake roaches in her food. However, the prank soon took a more significant turn. One day, the girl woke up with a real dead rat on her chest, from whose mouth blood was dripping. And the next day, she almost burned her eyes because a jar labeled as eye cream turned out to contain hot sauce. This meant that, firstly, someone was intruding into her room without permission and rummaging through her things. And secondly, she narrowly avoided becoming disabled by quickly washing off the incredibly spicy sauce that got into her eyes. Elle endured everything as best she could. But how could she ignore such incidents? After another incident, Elle felt a boiling rage inside her. Initially, she planned to go straight to Holt and tell him about what his granddaughter was doing to the estate's employees. However, She stopped herself in time and decided to reflect on it. Wouldn't this move lead to even bigger problems? It couldn't be denied that Holt would once again defend his granddaughter. Moreover, if Farron also shared the story about the puddle, Elle wouldn't be heard at all. She would be fired from her job immediately. It would be better to go to the police right away. Elle was already dialing 911 on her phone but changed her mind at the last moment. Her indecision played a role at that moment, and she thought she would try to solve the problem herself. And that became her first mistake. At first, Elle decided to act differently. Without descending into arguments with the child this time, she took a piece of paper and wrote only one sentence on it. "Another prank, and I'm calling the police." She managed to locate Erin's room and slipped the note under the door. And it worked. At least, the threatening messages and pranks didn't bother Elle for the next few days. However, it didn't last long. On Thursday, August 25th, Elle didn't show up at work. She was supposed to clean the guest rooms that day, so her absence was only noticed around lunchtime. An annoyed Mrs. Robb sent Asa to look for her. Asa decided to check Elle's room first, knocked on the door, but received no response. Thinking that Elle might have gone somewhere, Asa tried calling, but she heard the ringtone from Elle's phone behind the door. "Elle, are you in there?" she shouted. Feeling fear gradually creeping in, Asa quickly pulled out a hairpin, inserted it into the lock, and turned it several times. The lock clicked, and the door easily opened. Asa rushed into the room and immediately found Elle lying on the bed with a pale face. In panic, Asa approached her friend and shook her shoulders. Elle, wake up. Oh God, what's wrong with you?" She checked Elle's pulse on her wrist, and it was there. Elle was just unconscious. Asa quickly called an ambulance. Only then did she more attentively survey the surroundings. There was nothing suspicious in the room. Well, almost. On the table lay a dead rat with its head cut off. Asa didn't immediately understand what it was, but when she approached closer, she screamed throughout the mansion. Mrs. Robb, alarmed by the scream, rushed in, nearly having a heart attack at the sight of this scene. No one understood what had happened until Elle woke up in the hospital. She woke up. "Thank God." Colin sighed. "Elle," Mrs. Robb gasped. "Call a doctor. Tell them she's awake." "Elle, what happened to you?" Paige asked. "Give the person a moment to gather herself," Asa said. A doctor entered the room after a minute, escorting all visitors out. He adjusted the 4 on Elle's arm, sat down next to her, and asked a few questions about her well-being. Elle seemed to respond, but later couldn't remember exactly what she said. Thoughts were foggy in her mind, but she managed to focus on the doctor's words. From his explanation, she understood that she had lost consciousness due to intoxication, severe poisoning, and while her body recovered, she needed rest. Colin visited her only in the evening of the next day. Until then, Elle lay weakly on the bed, occasionally experiencing bouts of nausea. Doctor said it was normal, as the body was getting rid of harmful substances. She took pills several times a day, and by the end of Saturday, she finally felt a bit better, although her face still had a greenish tint. Colin and Elle were both in the same hospital. He came on his own, without the wheelchair, and told Elle that he would be discharged the day after tomorrow. But before they could talk, the other guests burst into the room. Elle was struck by such care. Suddenly, she felt very needed, just as she imagined before falling asleep. Unfortunately, her mood darkened again when they asked her how she got so severely poisoned. Elle really didn't want to recall that morning. "It's Erin," she said. "She's been seeking revenge on me for over a week." "Which Erin?" "Mr. Holt's granddaughter," Mrs. Robb exclaimed in surprise. "The one and only," Colin replied. He briefly recounted all the main events related to this particular person. "Elle, and you kept silent?" exclaimed Asa after hearing the story. "Can you tell us more specifically what happened yesterday morning?" Mrs. Robb asked. She somehow got into my room. Maybe she has a spare key. Elle began, but she was interrupted again. Yes, Colin answered. Holt has duplicate keys for every room, and apparently, Erin gained access to them, or she acts with a hairpin, added Asa. I don't know how she operates, but when I woke up, she was already standing right over me. I couldn't get up or ask anything. She sat on a chair nearby and insisted that she would never harm me again under the condition that I become her nanny. I didn't quite understand what it meant, but it seemed she wanted me to become her personal servant. I told her to leave the room and that I wouldn't do anything she asked. Erin replied that it wasn't a request but an order, emphasized that she's the boss, the heiress of the estate, and I must obey her. Elle fell silent for a couple of seconds, staring at the wall, and then she pulled out a knife. I don't know what she intended to do with it, but she started twirling it and making threats. Elle said, "You should have called the police. Maybe she has some kind of mental disorder." Paige suggested, "Most likely." Asa smirked grimly. "I was even afraid to move," Elle said, "especially after she took out the rat she had recently tossed at me and cut its throat." "Sounds like a horror movie," Colin remarked. Then someone started walking outside the door, and apparently, she got scared that I might scream, and she would be caught. She threatened and said that if I made a sound, she would plunge the knife into me. I've never been so afraid of a child in my life. Then she ordered me to take a glass of water from the nightstand and drink it all. I suspected she might have added something to it. Elle's voice suddenly broke, and everyone noticed tears shimmering in her eyes. She stayed with me until the last moment, until I blacked out, so I couldn't call anyone. She whispered, "Okay, I'm going to the corridor. I'll call the police." Colin exclaimed, getting up from his chair. "Are there cameras near my room? If yes, then proving everything will be straightforward." Elle said, "It seems not." "I don't think she would have overlooked that," Colin replied. "Elle, don't cry. She'll get what she deserves." Paige embraced Elle, and she's poisoned not the first person. Asa said thoughtfully, "What do you mean?" "Remember, even before Elle joined us, a girl named Sarah was hired. She really wanted this job but ended up quitting after just a month. No one could understand why. She always looked frightened and closely associated with Theron, always by her side. Everyone thought it was friendship, and when she quit, they assumed it was also by her own choice. But now, I think I understand." "Yes," exclaimed Paige. "And there was a similar case with Mr. Knight's father. Erin was around 12 back then. He was already quite elderly. She constantly belittled and insulted him, and he would only respond that he found it unpleasant, and one shouldn't communicate with elders like that. Then Erin began to visit him frequently. After a few weeks of this, he had a heart attack." "Why does she harbor so much hatred?" Elle asked with a trembling voice. "If she's the heiress of the estate, there won't be anything left of it in the future," Asa stated. Suddenly, Mrs. Robb joined the conversation. "In fact, she is not the heiress," the woman said thoughtfully. "Erin doesn't really have any relation to the estate. Actually, neither does Mr. Holt." Osa's eyes instantly sparked. "I knew he obtained his position through some dark means." "Why do you think so?" Elle asked in surprise. "Almost all my ancestors worked here, so I am well acquainted with the history of the estate," Mrs. Robb said. "The last true owner was Michael Holt, who passed away in 1974. He was Scarlett Holt's eldest grandson, known in the estate's history as the best caretaker of a private school. Scarlett's daughter had 2 sons, and the younger one, Albert, died at the age of 33. After Scarlett's death, Michael became the owner, but his ownership was short-lived as he died of cancer 3 years later." "And to whom did the estate pass?" Paige asked. At that moment, everything took a turn. There were supposedly 2 contenders, Michael's son, Riley, and Albert's daughter, Miranda. Miranda was only 18 at the time, so, of course, they chose Riley. His mother arranged everything upon learning that the estate needed an owner. However, Michael had long been divorced from his wife, and no one knew that Riley wasn't his biological son because his mother forged the documents. Only a couple of people, including my father, were aware of this. So, Mr. Holt is an illegitimate son, not the true owner. In addition, Michael bequeathed the estate to remain a school, just as it was during his mother's and grandmother's time. However, Riley, who had immersed himself in biology, rearranged everything to suit himself. Colin, who was already by the door, gestured to Elle that he had called the police. He suddenly straightened up and disappeared behind the door, apparently remembering something. Elle frowned. "And does Mr. Holt know about this?" she asked. "Of course," Mrs. Robb nodded. "And his children know too. So, he is aware that he is an illegitimate owner and continues to impose his rules," Elle exclaimed, rising in indignation. She used to think that Mr. Knight's gardener tales about Holt acquiring the estate in Fairley were untrue. So she was shocked by this turn of events. Mrs. Robb shrugged. "Yes, but I've long come to terms with it. The Holt estate was home for me and my entire family. It's painful to see what it's turning into now. Holt invests all the money inherited into his plants, and the mansion is slowly decaying. But we can't do anything about it. We need the rightful heir, Miranda's descendant, to come forward. As far as I know, after her father's death, she moved to another city with her mother. It's unknown what happened to her, whether she has children, and if they are aware of their inheritance. Oh God, I wish Erin would disappear and stop bothering everyone," Asa exclaimed. "Can't we do anything about this?" "We can." The door swung open, and Colin walked into the room. He approached the table next to Elle's bed and spread out a huge newspaper. "Because, possibly, we've found the real heir." Everyone looked at Colin questioningly, and Elle sat up on the bed and peered into the newspaper. "I found where the clipping came from," Colin said. He unfolded a slightly crumpled photograph and inserted it into a hole in the newspaper. The photo matched exactly, even the tiniest details. Underneath it was a small caption: "Scarlett Holt in her youth, 1911. It turns out it was made over 100 years ago. Elle, your doppelganger, is Scarlett Holt, the same one under whom the estate was a renowned private school. Here, read this." The guy pointed to the caption beneath the photograph. Elle's heart beat excitedly in her chest. She sat down and started reading the note about Scarlett Holt. May 23rd, 1950. A very mournful day for our entire town. Because yesterday, at the age of 64, the wonderful Mrs. Scarlett Holt, the owner of the best private school in our town and simply a remarkable woman, passed away. Many residents spoke of her as the brightest and kindest person on earth. Throughout her life, Scarlett not only elevated her own school and graduated at least 100 outstanding students, but also actively participated in the town's life, donated money to charity, and personally helped people and animals. This person will forever remain in the memory of our town. Now the school is passing into the possession of her eldest daughter, Evangeline, and we hope that she can preserve all its values and traditions. May this school always remind us of such a wonderful person as Scarlett. Farewell to Scarlett Holt will take place on the sports field next to the school on May 30 at 4 o'clock. Elle tore herself away from the newspaper and looked at everyone present. For some reason, she suddenly felt short of breath. She lay back down. "Elle, do you understand what all this means?" Colin asked. "I really don't understand," Asa said. "What's with the old newspaper? And why is Elle in it?" Colin rolled his eyes. "This isn't Elle. Read what's written about this girl in the newspaper. It's Scarlett Holt. Most likely, Elle is her descendant. And if that's the case, then the estate belongs to her, not Riley and Erin." Asa took the newspaper in her hands. "Where did you even get this?" "I found it in the attic while serving my punishment," Elle said. "Imagine how it will turn out if Elle turns out to be the real descendant of Scarlett Holt and becomes the new owner of the estate. life will start then. And the most interesting thing is that, in fact, if not for Erin herself, Elle might never have been sent to the attic. She wouldn't have found the photo and wouldn't have known about her ancestry. The guy said, "It's just incredible." But if it were that simple. Asa shook her head. No matter how identical Scarlett and Elle may be, we don't have a single document confirming their relationship. Yes, you're right. But between Miranda, Scarlett's great-granddaughter, and Elle, there's only one generation. I think it won't be so difficult to gather information about one person. Yeah. What kind of people are you? Mrs. Robb said, discussing how to assign the estate to Elle. Although, perhaps, thanks to this photo, she can find her family. The woman sat on the bed and stroked Elle's hand. That's what we're thinking about, Colin said. Does anyone know if orphanages keep information about the biological parents of their wards? And can orphanage staff tell Elle about them? Paige asked. Deep in Elle's heart, doubt suddenly arose. What if their resemblance to Scarlett Holt is just a coincidence? Or perhaps they won't be able to find any information about her biological mother. Or, on the contrary, she'll find her, but she won't want to see her. Well, you need to address the Sitter Hall for that, not the orphanage, Colin said. Well, I'm not really good at such things, and yet, where should we turn? I'd rather Google it now, Paige said. She took out her phone, and after a few seconds, she said, Here, I found it. Based on the birth certificate, you can request a copy of the birth record. It contains the child's original data, surname, first name, patronymic, date, and place of birth, as well as the names of the biological parents. How complicated everything is. Elle exclaimed. Don't worry. We'll solve everything quickly now. We'll find your mom, and we'll deal with the estate owners, Colin assured. If we find her mom, then the estate belongs to her, Asa pointed out. As always, to prove all this, we need Michael's will, suddenly said Mrs. Robb. Everyone fell silent abruptly, and all eyes turned to the woman, which, of course, we don't have. Elle whispered. Well, I don't know. We might be able to find it, Colin said. However, there was no longer confidence in his voice. Suddenly, a nurse burst into the room. She looked very concerned and tense. The visiting time is over. Could you please leave the room? She asked. Just 5 more minutes, Asa said. I'm sorry, but the next visitors will be here soon. Visitors? Colin smirked. Is she some kind of exhibit to you? As soon as the friends left the room, Elle tensely sat up in bed. She really didn't know who else might visit her. It didn't take a minute for 2 huge mustached men in police uniforms to appear at the door. Introducing themselves, they approached and asked to confirm the statement filed by Colin online. Elle closed her eyes, took a slow breath, but confirmed absolutely everything. After that, the men asked the victim a few more questions. It was very uncomfortable for Elle to talk to them, especially because many questions revolved around Erin. The girl knew that the police were the only way out in such circumstances. However, she couldn't shake off the feeling that all this was breaking someone's destiny. If Erin was convicted, she wouldn't be able to attend a prestigious university or get a good job in the future. Elle tried to push away these thoughts and honestly answered all the police questions. The men left the room looking puzzled and concentrated. They spoke quietly among themselves, but when they finally exited, Elle didn't feel much relief. She pondered for a long time how everything had changed so abruptly, and she found herself in such a situation. The girl vaguely envisioned her future and didn't know where all this would lead. Elle spent 2 more days in the hospital, which seemed very agonizing to her. She was drowning in an endless stream of thoughts, contemplating Riley Holt, Erin, her friends, her parents, and that photograph from the newspaper. Elle believed she was on the right path and was about to find out who her real parents were. She and Colin were discharged on the same day, when she once again stood in front of the familiar ornate gates of the estate. Anxiety engulfed her. There was chaos in the estate. Over the past 2 days, the news that the police had come to investigate Erin had spread at an incredible speed. The situation was fueled by the fact that many employees confirmed the disrespectful treatment of the staff in the past week. All the visiting scientists and colleagues of Holt had scattered to avoid causing any interference, so the staff had less to deal with. However, work was not cancelled, and Elle hadn't received new assignments yet. She needed to go and clarify the tasks with Mrs. Monaghan. But Elle just sat on the bed. She expected that she would be called, especially by Holt. Elle and Holt definitely had topics to discuss. Let's start with the fact that the girl's probation period was supposed to end almost a week ago, but no one informed her whether she was officially hired. Apparently, the estate owner had much more important matters now, thanks to Elle. About an hour later, Colin entered the room. He informed Elle that Asa and Paige were searching for someone's expensive watch again, and they, along with Elle, were free from work for the rest of the day. Colin suggested going to the dining room for a meal, but Elle didn't want to interact with anyone at the moment. Outside the window, the sound of garden shears could be heard, and Elle saw Mr. Knight trimming branches on the trees. Colin asked if Elle wanted to take a stroll in the yard. With autumn approaching, Elle put on a knitted sweater, and she and Colin went outside. They hardly spoke during the work, but the silence wasn't burdensome. As evening approached, the friends turned back. Surprisingly, Mr. Knight was still working under Elle's windows by an unimpressive tree. "Why are you working so hard, Mr. Knight?" Colin asked. "Well, kids, I plan to finish this row, but it seems I won't make it today," he replied. "Let us help." "What needs to be done?" Colin offered. "I don't even know. Kids, can you handle it? What needs to be done?" Elle and Colin approached. "Look," Mr. Knight pointed to one of the branches. "See the orange spots on the leaves? All branches with such leaves need to be pruned and sprayed with a special solution. We can handle it." Colin responded. "What kind of tree is this?" Elle asked. "It's a tea tree, which could be used to produce the popular Chinese pu tea." Mr. Knight smiled. "Of course, we don't grow it for that purpose. These trees are here for beauty, but I collected some leaves for myself once and dried them. It's not the original pu recipe, but the tea turned out delicious." "That's cool. I'd love to try such tea," Colin said. "Then come in. I still have those leaves. If you want, right after we finish the row," Mr. Knight suggested. "Shall we?" Elle asked Colin. The three of them quickly processed the remaining 4 trees, and Mr. Knight led the friends. It turned out he lived not in the mansion, but in a separate small house in the backyard. This place seemed mysteriously enchanting, as if they had entered a fairy tale forest. Mr. Knight's house resembled the dwelling of a forest ranger. Dried mushrooms hung at the entrance. A lovely bouquet of wild flowers adorned the windowsill, and the interior was charmingly cozy. A long knitted rug lay at the threshold, and the room featured beautiful carved furniture. Mr. Knight seated the guests at a small table, set water to boil, and when the tea was ready, he tossed a few leaves into each cup and placed them in front of the guests. Once everyone finally settled, Elle savored the delicate aroma of the tea and started nibbling on some cookies. "Elle, how do you like visiting Mr. Knight?" Colin asked. "Very cozy," she replied. "Tell me, what's new with you all?" "Colin, how are things with Asa?" the old man inquired. "I don't know. Everything's fine." "Well, much better than before," Elle chimed in. "Not true. Everything's the same." "Well, okay. Tell Asa to drop by sometime too." "How is she doing?" "At least, quite well," the young man said. "She's retelling your stories about the mansion's ghost to everyone." "Why do you tell everyone this story?" Elle asked. "Do you know what really happened?" "How would I know?" the old man said. "All I know is that our mansion should have a different owner, not Riley Holt. It won't be 5 years before he ruins it completely." mark my words. Although, of course, he maintains the garden and greenhouse splendidly. He's only interested in plants. Colin said, Elle would be a better owner. Why Elle specifically? Mr. Knight wondered. You see, it's a situation. Elle, may I tell? The girl nodded. There was warmth emanating from the old man, and she immediately felt that she could trust him. Colin told him the whole story. However, the old man just laughed when he heard the boy out. Interesting idea, kids. But still, it's not well thought out. You can't outdo me. I'm the best storyteller around. Actually, that's true, protested Elle. Too bad I didn't take a picture of that newspaper photo on my phone. Mr. Knight, we're not joking, confirmed Colin. Things could have turned out quite well if we had documents proving Elle's relationship to Miranda from Michael's will. I don't know what to tell you, kids, the old man said. If I were dying, I'd leave my will in the most obvious place to make sure it's found and my wishes are followed. The most obvious place in our mansion is Mr. Holt's desk and the folder with documents in it. I don't think the desk with the folder existed 70 years ago. Elle sighed. How do you even know about the folder? Colin wondered. I've been working here for so many years. I've seen more than just that, Mr. Knight said. Elle and Colin left only when they realized that there were 30 minutes left until curfew. On the way, Colin pondered that the will was most likely hidden in Holt's office. He wouldn't leave it unattended. Meanwhile, Elle was lost in her thoughts. However, her friend's musings slightly unsettled her, and it turned out she had reason for concern. Someone forcefully pounded on the door. Elle's heart raced. Was it Taryn again? Clad in pajamas, she approached the door and whispered, "Who's there?" "It's me, Asa." "Open it, urgently." Elle quickly let her friend in and turned on the light. "Asa, did you see the time? It's almost curfew. How did you get through?" "Elle, we'll talk about it later. We have an emergency." Asa stood in fluffy slippers and a cute silk pajama set. "Colin is not in the room. He ran away," she panically informed Elle. "How do you know that?" "I was just with him. He's gone." "What were you doing at Colin's at midnight?" Elle had no idea how to react to such news. "Elle, it doesn't matter right now. We need to find Colin." "But you were the one saying you don't like him and something else," Elle remarked. "Elle, aren't you worried about him? What if he got some crazy idea and decided to wander around the mansion at night? What if he gets caught and fired?" "He's not foolish enough to wander around the mansion at night. And you've become really concerned about him all of a sudden." Suddenly, the phone on the nightstand rang. "It's Colin." She waved the phone and pressed it to her ear. "Hello. Where are you wandering?" Elle paused for a moment, listening to her friend's words. "What? No. Why? Go back. No. No. No." Asa watched as Elle's expression changed rapidly. Elle hung up the phone and looked at her friend with a bewildered expression. "About him not being foolish," she said. "I take back my words." "What happened?" Asa whispered. "Here's the thing. This genius sneaked into Holt's office, and only they remembered that there are cameras everywhere. So he's asking me to sneak behind the concierge desk and clear the records." "Why did he go there?" Asa wondered. "And Elle, can you even operate the equipment?" "No, of course not. I haven't even appeared in the hallway after curfew. By the way, he also asked me to call you and ask you to come to him to pick the lock with your magical hairpin." Asa got scared. "Well, then I'm going to him if he asks." "Are you out of your mind?" she asked. "You didn't even bother to ask why he needs this." Elle grabbed the girl by the wrist. "What if it's something serious?" Asa said. "And do you understand yourself what he's planning to do?" "No, but I have an idea. Listen, Asa, this is madness. Sneaking into your boss's office at night. You'll definitely get fired immediately. They'll fire us if you don't clear the camera recording. Come on, Elle. All hope is on you." Asa freed her hand and was in the corridor in a second. "I don't even know how to operate anything there." Elle shouted in desperation. Elle was in a panic. She still didn't know what to do. Should she stay put and avoid trouble, run to help Asa and Colin with their crazy schemes, or go and disable the cameras? After all, by morning, everything would be revealed, and they would be immediately fired. A decision came suddenly. She walked into the dark, intimidating corridor. A chill ran down Elle's spine. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept moving forward. The mansion at night looked completely different from during the day. The most familiar places now seemed alien and ominous. Elle tried to stay close to the wall, even breathing silently. However, when she reached the staircase, her fear subsided a bit. Elle turned and found herself at the main entrance. A red light was flashing above the glass door. The alarm. Opposite the door was a large concierge desk. Elle carefully worked behind it and surveyed the equipment. "Sorry, Mrs. Monaghan. I'm not planning to do anything wrong," she said. "Where am I getting involved again?" A thought flashed in her mind. Elle clearly sensed a shadow nearby and froze. Squinting, she realized that someone was indeed standing by the wall. She quickly crouched down, hiding behind the desk. At that moment, she heard quiet footsteps approaching her. Someone not too tall stopped by the table, waited for a moment, and then also went behind the counter. Most of all, at that moment, Elle wanted to vanish. She realized that the person who had come would soon notice her and give her away. Elle even felt offended that her operation had failed so quickly. Elle closed her eyes. She could hear the quiet and steady breathing of the visitor. She opened one eye, and Mrs. Rubb, the woman, startled and began to panic, turning her head frantically. "Who's there?" she asked. Elle straightened up and appeared in front of the woman. "Oh, Elle." Mrs. Rubb exhaled. "What are you doing here?" the girl asked. "I suspect the same as you. And please, Elle, speak more quietly. Asa came to me and asked for help with your matter." Elle watched in bewilderment as Mrs. Rubb skillfully pressed the necessary buttons. The computer slowly powered up and began to hum monotonously. "I never thought I'd be helping you pull off such things," grumbled Mrs. Rubb, typing something on the keyboard. "But if you think it will help." Elle didn't think anything. She was still in shock and couldn't believe that Colin, Asa, and Mrs. Rubb had taken such a desperate step. "Mrs. Rubb, you shouldn't have. I could have done it myself," Elle mumbled. "You wouldn't have managed it yourself." The woman sighed. "There are passwords everywhere. Do you know them?" the girl asked. "How?" "Once, I was tasked with replacing Mrs. Monaghan. Fortunately, I have a good reputation, and they can trust me with such things. And so, if you get caught, they'll be even more disappointed," Elle said to herself, nervously looking around. "And here comes our sneaky friend." Mrs. Rubb clicked on the window with the camera recording. On the black and white video, Colin could be seen carefully making his way straight to the boss's door. The woman fast-forwarded a bit, and there he was, standing by the door, leaning against it and waiting. She fast-forwarded a bit more. Asa appeared on the screen. The girl hugged Colin, said something to him, and pulled out an indispensable hairpin from her pocket. "Deleted quickly," Asa exclaimed. "It's already deleted. But, as far as I know, deleted records are sent somewhere, and there are ways to retrieve and view them. So, we need to clean them everywhere. But how to do it, I don't know anymore," Mrs. Rubb said, looking at Elle. "And what should we do?" "Well," said Mrs. Rubb, "you go to your friends. I'll stay here and try to figure it out. I'll also clear the records later when you head back." "Okay." Elle nodded. She couldn't remember how she reached Holt's office. It all felt like a crazy dream. An endless sense of anxiety lingered with her. Standing at the boss's door, Elle couldn't resist glancing at the dark upper corner. She couldn't see it, but she knew there was a camera. The girl menacingly waved her fist at the corner and decisively pulled the door handle. It turned out to be already open. Bright light hit her eyes, and Elle squinted. "Elle, why scare us like that?" Asa said. Elle saw her friends in front of her, standing near a massive table cluttered with thick books and folders. It seemed like a big task awaited them. "Well, I didn't even know that Holt's office could be so bright," Elle said, looking around. Only now, for the first time, she could thoroughly examine his office. There was a large velvet chair behind the oak desk in the middle of the room. There were a couple of dressers and a shelf by the walls. A simple light bulb on the ceiling. Probably, it was the only room in the mansion, excluding the attic, where crystal chandeliers didn't hang. Dark curtains were tightly drawn on the windows. "Elle, if we don't get anything done now, you'll definitely be scrutinizing this office again, but under different circumstances. So, let's get going," Colin said. Entering the room and hiding from the cameras didn't make Elle feel much better. "We already checked here," Colin said when she pulled the handle of the dresser. "Look in another one." Elle rushed to the second dresser, but quickly realized that she was unlikely to find anything there. Apparently, Holt was not a neat person. In the top drawer of the dresser, there were many pencils, pens, stamps, and even a couple of waffle packages. The second drawer turned out to be more interesting because it was locked, and to open it, a key was needed. Elle had to ask Asa to pick another lock. Inside, there were various accessories: rings, bracelets, watches. Elle wasn't familiar with these things, but everything looked very expensive. Precious stones sparkled on many items. Not the most suitable place to store documents. There won't be a will there. Although, if I wanted to hide something from everyone, I would put it where no one would think to look, Elle thought. She rummaged through the entire dresser but found nothing. Elle stared in horror at the bookshelf reaching the ceiling. Holt could have placed the will in any book, and there were about 500 of them. Asa sat on the floor, flipping through the second shelf. "Why did I get involved in this?" she muttered. "I'm so tired. I just want to sleep." Colin, as always, remained unperturbed. "Come on, Asa, shake your head. It'll get easier. You've already done such work." 67 books, Asa said. 67 books. And they're all empty. Although we've been sitting here for almost an hour, Asa decisively closed another book. "I'm tired. I'll check something else." "We've already looked everywhere," Colin sighed. "And please, speak quieter. There's no soundproofing in these walls, and Holt's bedroom is not as far as you think." They worked silently for a while, but soon Elle also grew tired of the endless flipping of books. Suddenly, she remembered Mrs. Rubb. If no one had come after them so far, it meant the woman hadn't betrayed them and was still standing behind the concierge desk, waiting for her friends to leave the office to clear the records again. "Why did you think the will is in this office?" Elle unexpectedly asked. "It's the most logical place for it," Colin replied. "Although I'm not sure. So many years have passed. The paper could easily have been lost." "Are you sure you've thoroughly checked everywhere?" Asa asked, slowly walking around the office. The girl opened the dresser drawers once again and examined them. Suddenly, she froze and exclaimed in a whisper, "Whoa, have you seen what's here?" "What's there?" Colin hurried over to Asa and peered into the drawer. It turned out she had found a drawer with expensive accessories, which she had recently unlocked with a hairpin. "Why would Holt have all this?" Colin asked. "I've never noticed him wearing jewelry." Asa twirled a beautiful bracelet in her hands. "Maybe he did wear them." She sighed. "It's just like I've seen all of these somewhere before." Such a strange déjà vu feeling. Whether he wore them or not, we definitely shouldn't touch them. So put it back in its place, and let's continue searching for the will. "Wait." The girl frowned. "I've definitely seen them before. For example," she grabbed beautiful golden watches. "These are the same watches we were looking for with Paige today." Her eyes slowly widened. "It's true. And here's the diamond brooch that I was also supposed to find." "Are you saying that Holt tasked you to look for supposedly lost items while they were in his dresser?" Colin skeptically looked at Asa. Use your brain, Colin Bowstick. These aren't his things. These are lost items of his colleagues and employees. I've been wondering why everything always disappears for newcomers here. And now, it seems, I understand what's wrong here. There's no ghost pulling out all valuables. Actually, before thinking such things about him, we can consider other possibilities, Colin said. Maybe these are found items that someone else brought to him. Then why hasn't he returned them so far? Many of these things were lost not a week or two ago, but much earlier. Asa, do you mean to say that Holt is a thief? Asa just sighed loudly and put the watches back on one of the top shelves of the bookshelf. Elle discovered a very interesting book spine with golden letters saying, "The Complete History of the Holt Estate." So, swaying a bit, she stood on tiptoes on the chair, trying to reach the book with her fingertips. Elle managed to hook the book with her nail, pull it off the shelf, and drop it onto herself. She placed the book on the table. She slowly ran her hand over its smooth leather cover and the golden threaded title embroidered on it. The book looked slightly worn but very beautiful. Elle couldn't wait to take a look inside. This discovery could turn out to be very useful, so she fully focused on it. She carefully opened the first page and realized that it was not a book at all, but a large photo album with a leather cover. Unlike her, the album inside was very old. Each photograph was accompanied by a lengthy caption about the depicted place, person, or event. The entries dated back to the 19th century and were handwritten. The yellowed pages even had ink blots, making the album more like someone's diary. But it seemed to have been written by more than one person. Occasionally, handwriting styles and ink colors changed. Over time, the dirt and blots disappeared from the pages. Entries began to be made with a ballpoint pen, and black and white photos gradually gave way to color. Elle looked at the album as if observing the passing years from a distance. One era replaced another. After going through the album to the end, Elle flipped through it again, then once more. She froze on one of the pages. It was dedicated to the memory of Scarlett Holt. There were a dozen photos of the estate's owner in childhood, youth, mature age, in dresses, in coats, on swings, in the field, surrounded by smiling children, probably her students. Looking at these photos, Elle realized that she now knew how she would look in a few decades. But no matter the age or place depicted, this woman emitted an atmosphere of something kind and joyful. Elle decided that she would really like to be a descendant of this person. On the back of the spread, Scarlett's will was tucked into a transparent pocket, stating that she bequeathed her possessions to her daughter and requested her to continue developing the school. On several other pages, Elle found other wills from previous estate owners. This could mean that hope ignited in Elle's heart once again. Elle immediately turned to the last entry in the album about the new owner, Riley Holt. It was made several decades ago, indicating that the diary had been abandoned. The previous spread was dedicated to Michael. He turned out to be a quite handsome and fit man. However, Elle still couldn't find his will. She was ready to cry from frustration. Why does the law of unfairness always prevail in her life? She was fortunate only once, landing a prestigious job. But even there, her archenemy awaited, trying to make things difficult for her at every turn, and succeeding. Suddenly, Elle felt terribly sorry for herself. She sighed and was about to put the album back in its place when she noticed a strange envelope attached to the back cover. She didn't want to check it, but at the last moment, she changed her mind and decided to be cautious. Elle took the folded sheet of paper from the envelope, unfolded it, and read the first few lines. Elle's eyes slowly widened. "I found it," she exclaimed, her voice shocked. No one heard her, and Elle stood alone, rereading the words on the paper. "Will for all property. I, Michael Holt, born on July 22, 1920, being of sound mind and memory, in a condition clearly threatening life, to make the following disposition in the event of my death. The Holt estate, located at 10 Hubbard Street, shall pass as an inheritance to any of my relatives and shall continue to be used exclusively as a school. All my other property, whatever it may consist of, and wherever it may be found on the day of my death, I bequeath to the same person. Under no circumstances should my property and the Holt estate transfer to the ownership of my ex-wife Sharon Klein or any of her relatives and descendants. Below were the date and 2 signatures, Michael's and the notary, verifying the authenticity of the document. Elle stood staring at the document, unable to believe her luck. She only snapped out of it after Os's exclamation under her ear. Her friend peeked over her shoulder and saw Elle's discovery. Asa covered her mouth with her palm and began to hop around the room. Asa, you're going to wake someone up. Colin turned around. What's happening here? Elle slowly raised her gaze to him, a smile appearing on her face. I found it, she whispered. Found it, Colin. What did you find? He asked and approached Elle. Colin snatched the will from Elle's hands and his eyes quickly scanned the lines. Elle, where was it? Colin's face was radiant. Now our plan regains strength. Honestly, I had given up hope of finding this will. The young lady was overwhelmed with happiness and pride. But, Colin, let's discuss your emotions later, Elle interjected. She shook her head, firmly deciding not to let her feelings take over and maintain a sense of reason. Don't forget it's nearly 2 in the morning, and we're secretly in Holt's office. Besides, there's a mess here because of us, and we have to get everything back in place to avoid any suspicions. Mrs. Robb has been waiting downstairs for a long time, and I want to remind you that tomorrow is no day off for any of us, she said. Got it, Colin said. Asa still looked very joyful, while Elle remained focused. We need to urgently put everything back in its place, Elle quickly said, surveying the room. Where's the album? So, you found it in this book. The album was in Colin's hands, and he was already flipping through the pages. Well, is there nothing mentioned about Miranda's descendants here? Not a word, Elle replied. Asa managed to close the drawer with lost items, while Elle continued to tidy up the remaining scattered items. As Asa freed up, she surveyed the room and joined Elle. Listen, I didn't tell you. Colin and I came to the conclusion that our Riley Holt is a thief. All the items disappearing from his guests actually belong to him. At least, that's the only explanation I can find. Wait, what are you doing? The girl just noticed that Elle was rummaging through the chief's desk. We need to leave here quickly. Why are you pulling out a folder with documents? You yourself said we need to hurry. We've already found everything we need, Asa said. Not everything yet, Elle frowned. She had never experienced so much adrenaline before, pulling out and dumping a pile of papers on the table. Colin and Asa anxiously urged her on, having no idea what she was up to. Elle, it's time to go, Colin called. Elle looked into his eyes and said firmly, for everything to work out, we also need confirmation that I am a descendant of Miranda. If you haven't noticed, this folder contains documents of all Riley's relatives and ancestors. Take a look. Elle showed the guy a few papers. I think if he knew he was an illegitimate owner, he would likely be interested in information related to Miranda. So if she died, he might still have a death certificate. Why would he have it? Colin asked. Where did he get the documents about the others then? Don't make up stories. Let's get out of here quickly. Here it is. Elle pulled out a sheet from the folder. Death certificate of Miranda Holt. September 17th, 2018. If my grandmother passed away here, there's a higher chance my mom isn't on the other side of the world. It's about time you admit that our Elle is a genius. Asa nodded. No one could sleep that night. There were too many adventures in the last couple of hours. Elle recalled Mrs. Robb's expression, who fortunately managed to sort everything out and clean all records from the cameras. Now, if luck is on our side, we'll be able to execute the plan. And it won't take much time. But what if luck isn't on their side? What if Elle doesn't turn out to be Miranda's granddaughter? What if it's all in vain? Elle managed to doze off briefly at dawn, But according to her feelings, it wasn't even a minute before the alarm clock rang. Elle's head was pounding, but time was relentless. In the corridor, she ran into Asa and Colin. They didn't look any better. She couldn't manage to work that day. Before she could learn about her assignments for the day, Paige approached her and informed that Mr. Holt urgently awaited Elle in his office. "I didn't expect to be here so soon," she thought, stepping over the threshold of his office. Fortunately or unfortunately, the old man began talking about his granddaughter again. Elle realized she worried in vain. It seemed he didn't notice any changes in his room, although Elle immediately spotted a bright hairpin left by Asa on the dresser. In general, everything was as usual on this morning, as if Elle hadn't spent the entire night rummaging through the chief's office. The conversation with him turned out to be very dull. Mr. Holt practically begged Elle to withdraw her statement and refute all the accusations against Erin. He even offered a small bribe. The conversation didn't end properly. The infuriated boss literally pushed the girl out of the office and threatened to fire her if she didn't change her decision before her day off, which was a week away. And during this week, there was a lot to accomplish. Elle hadn't even had breakfast when she was informed that the police were currently in the building and wanted to talk to Mr. Holt, Elle, and someone close to her. Once again, Elle was taken in for questioning. She encountered a stern woman who read questions from her notepad with a concentrated look, recorded her answers on a recorder, and nodded. They sat with the policewoman for quite a while. Elle recounted the events in detail. When the woman started asking about Mr. Holt, his relationships with her and other employees, Elle got carried away and blurted out that he probably steals from his colleagues. She wasn't sure if she should bring Osa's and Colin's assumptions into it, but there was no turning back. The officer became interested. Elle had to tell her about the missing items, deviating slightly from the original story. Most of all, Elle feared that they would find out about her nightly works. She tried to justify herself by saying that this might help rid the estate of its illegal owner and help her find the family she lost somewhere in the distant past. But the key word was might. Elle still had no real guarantees. She poorly understood whether everything happening to her now was good or bad. One thing Elle knew for sure: her life would change soon. The only unknown was in which direction. After listening to Elle, Police Officer Diana Arkin frowned, took a radio from her belt holster, and stepped into the corridor. Since the door was slightly ajar, Elle overheard her informing someone that she was very concerned about the theft theory. A male voice from the radio responded that the person he was interviewing also mentioned it. Elle immediately realized it was about Colin. Upon returning to the room, Diana thanked Elle for her time and hurried somewhere. But that day continued to bring surprises. Soon, the entire staff gathered in the lobby as another police officer asked everyone to leave the building for the next 2 to 3 hours. All employees were freed from work, allowed to take the essentials, and spend time in the garden or simply take a stroll around the city at their discretion. Many didn't understand what was going on, but Elle preferred not to waste time figuring it out. The main thing was that she had 3 hours of free time to spend on important matters. As it turned out later, a search was conducted in the estate. Firstly, after Erin seriously poisoned Elle, there could have been other, even more dangerous things. Secondly, everyone was concerned about presumably stolen valuables. But Elle didn't know about it yet. She entered the room, gathered all the necessary documents in her bag. The maid intended to go to the town hall and request information about her biological parents. In the corridor, she met the groggy Mrs. Rubb, who had just woken up and didn't understand what was happening. Elle, where are you going? Why is everyone in such a hurry?" the woman exclaimed, looking confused. "Is there an evacuation?" "No, Mrs. Rubb," Elle replied. "They just asked everyone to leave the mansion for a few hours." "Do I need to go too?" "Everyone needs to." "Then wait for me." "Elle, I can't. You see, I'm going to find out about my parents today." "How is that?" Mrs. Rubb asked. Elle had to quickly explain her plan to her. She didn't know how to proceed and how much time it would take, as she had never dealt with documents before, so she was afraid she wouldn't make it in time. Mrs. Robb insisted on taking her along, promising to accompany and guide her as much as she could. Elle called a taxi, and within 15 minutes, they arrived at the town hall. With such matters, you need to make an appointment in advance, said the town hall employee, listening to Elle's request. You need to provide a written explanation of why you need this information. However, the woman accepted Elle's documents and even allowed her to fill out everything necessary right there at the table. She provided instructions on what to do. Once everything was ready, the employee informed Elle that when the entire report was prepared, she would receive a notification by email. It would take from 7 to 14 days. Elle sighed desperately. Too long, but to expedite the process, money needed to be paid, which Elle didn't have. During the entire journey home, Elle talked with Mrs. Robb and felt a bit reassured. The woman assured her that everything would be fine, and Elle would meet her family very soon. In reality, Elle understood that the first thing she would find out is whether the will operation was in vain, whether she is a direct descendant of Miranda and the legitimate heir to the estate. I don't know, Mrs. Robb. My life often goes awry. Not as planned. It seems like everything is finally falling into place, but it breaks off again. I'm afraid this case will be the same, Elle said. The woman smiled sadly. My dear, your problem is that you don't notice all the good things happening to you. For instance, haven't you thought that life, on the contrary, presented you with an opportunity? Have you not noticed the friends it has given you? They are doing all of this for you. Who else, besides Asa and Colin, would venture on a nocturnal quest for wills, risking their jobs? And you? Elle raised her eyes and smiled too. However things unfold, there will come a moment when everything accidentally falls into the right time and place. All will be well. Mrs. Robb's words sounded firm and reassuring. Elle, for some reason, decided that if this woman said so, it would happen that way. At least, she, Elle, would do everything to make those words prophetic. Walking along the sidewalk, Elle realized that this conversation indeed made her feel warmer and lighter. Why do you think everything must inevitably go wrong? Mrs. Robb asked the girl. Elle shrugged thoughtfully. I don't know. It's just always been that way. Since the orphanage. No friends, no adventures, nothing. Was there really not a single happy moment since then? The woman asked. Maybe there were. Elle agreed. Well, I don't remember them. So many years have passed. Too bad. I would have loved to hear about them. No. Elle suddenly froze. There is something. You know, in our orphanage, all the kids were given gifts for holidays. In childhood, I believed it was Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. The caregivers said it was from them. Somehow, these fairy tale characters liked me the most and would give small surprises even on regular days. I would be playing, and a caregiver would come up to me and give, for example, new fluffy socks or a headband with a bow. Elle chuckled, immersing herself in childhood memories. I was so happy that someone was buying all of this for me. Honestly, I still don't know who was really giving me all that. See how nice that was? What happened to those gifts when you grew up? They stopped bringing them. The girl answered sadly. I don't remember exactly when, but later, I started receiving the same candy bags for Christmas as all the other kids. When my son was little, I always tried to come up with something original for him. Oh, how happy he was. You have a son, Elle exclaimed. Why have you never mentioned it? Mrs. Robb sighed. What's there to tell? He's already grown up. It's been almost 2 years since he visited me, and he rarely calls. For some reason, life in the estate seemed to freeze for a few hours. When Elle and Mrs. Robb returned, everyone was still strolling in the garden. This gap in the middle of the workday lingered. Why? Naturally, no one informed the staff. It was only in the evening that they were told Mr. Holt would be away for some time, And in the meantime, his son-in-law, Aaron's father, would act as the temporary head. Later on, they realized that this man was quite reserved, caring little about worldly matters, such as what to eat for lunch or how many times to mop the hall. Therefore, the entire staff relaxed, knowing that no one would check and reprimand them for their work. But for Elle, it was torture. Work allowed her to distract herself and forget, temporarily escaping the thoughts of what would happen next. Every day, she checked her email hoping to see that awaited letter, and one day, she finally saw it. Only 4 days had passed since her visit to the town hall, but to Elle, it felt like an eternity. Mrs. Robb asked her and the girl to take a break from the temporary manager for a couple of hours. When Elle handed over the documents, her hands trembled, and her heart was ready to leap out of her chest. "Come on, Elle, don't drag it out," said Mrs. Robb. "Okay, I just need to brace myself. On the count of 3. I flipped the page and look." The girl slowly exhaled. Now she would learn the names of simultaneously the most unfamiliar and the closest people in her life. Most children who grew up in the orphanage usually harbor resentment towards their parents, unable to forgive them and unwilling to maintain communication. Elle, on the contrary, tried to come up with excuses for them. So, in just 3 seconds, she would know which direction her fate would turn. 3, 2, 1. She flipped the page and looked at the document. Biological father, David Turner. Mother, Julia Holt. Elle. This means you are indeed the lawful heiress of the estate. Such enormous coincidences don't happen. I told you everything would be fine, exclaimed Mrs. Robb. That's how quickly it all happened. Elle stared blankly at the document for a few minutes. Now she knew her parents' names. It was known that she belonged to the Holt family. The world didn't turn upside down after this revelation. She didn't become the owner of the estate, didn't meet her mom and dad in person. Everything remained the same. Julia, a beautiful name. If her mother was only 17 when Elle came into her life, it's understandable why they had different last names. Logically, Elle should be Turner, not Holt. But it didn't negate the fact of her relation to Miranda. Although, of course, she lacked documentary evidence. To obtain that, she needed to meet Julia, her mom. Elle sat by the window, contemplating. What could one do with a person's full name, age, and surname? The only idea that came to mind was to search on social media. The phone's search engine yielded 17 people with that name and surname. Moreover, over the years, many things could have changed. Her mom might have gotten married and no longer used her maiden name. She could have moved. In short, Elle could only rely on luck. Elle wouldn't write to every Julia in the country, asking, "Hello, are you by any chance my mom who left me in the orphanage 20 years ago?" She scrutinized those 17 accounts for a long time, contemplating what to write. Several Julias were quickly ruled out. Their profiles featured photos of old ladies or little girls. The rest could potentially be Elle's mom, although a couple of profiles were private. Nevertheless, Elle decided to reach out to all the remaining Julias. "Good evening. I apologize for the question, but it's crucial. Was your mom, by any chance, named Miranda Holt?" Elle considered this question to be the most normal and yet revealing enough to identify the right person. Throughout that evening and the next day, she received responses to her messages. All of them turned out to be negative. Almost all. One woman with a private account gave a vague answer. "My mom passed away a long time ago." "How long ago?" "Not in 2018. Elle inquired. "Listen, first, I'd like to know who I'm talking to and what you need." The woman replied, "I already told you. I just need to know if Miranda Holt was your mom." "Why do you need such information?" Elle's heart raced. If the stranger wasn't Miranda's daughter, she wouldn't be curious about why Elle needed that information. "I need to find her daughter." Elle honestly wrote, "Tell me, is it you?" For several long minutes, Julia was online but didn't respond. "Yes, it's me. Can I now know who you are? She finally replied. Upon seeing the message pop up, Elle's heart raced. She was now communicating with her mom. She hadn't changed her last name. After all, she was alive. Hello. Her mom wrote a second message in a row because Elle was silent, trying to gather her thoughts and break the news gently that her biological daughter was reaching out. Elle was increasingly afraid to send the fateful message. What if the woman blocked her after reading it, saying they didn't need to communicate? Or even worse, what if she revealed that Elle was never needed, and 20 years ago, she just got rid of a problem? Do you have children? Elle cautiously asked. What are you bothering me with? And why do you need to know if I have children? Julia snapped. I need to make sure you're the person I'm looking for. It's crucial. Elle typed. I have no children. Did you not give your daughter to the orphanage number 2 in 2002? Julia read the message. Elle understood the emotions the woman might be experiencing at that moment. Who are you? The woman asked again. However, now Elle felt that these two words contained something more, as if Julia had already understood everything. Elle thought that if her mom were standing in front of her now, instead of looking beyond the screen, she would probably whisper these words with her own lips. I'm Elle, your daughter. Elle pressed the send button and turned off her phone. Then, suddenly, she collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, and cried. She cried not out of sorrow or happiness. The emotions she was experiencing were unlike any others she had felt before. After a couple of minutes, it became easier. She washed her face and reopened the chat with her mom. There was still no response to her message, and Elle suddenly felt a new lump forming in her throat. This time, it was a lump of heart. Would her mom really not respond at all? Did she really not want to communicate with her daughter? Did she really not care at all? Elle took a deep breath and suddenly began to type quickly. I don't know what happened back then and what prompted you to do that, but I believe there were reasons for everything, so I try not to get angry. But now it doesn't matter. Everything that happened is in the past. I don't know if you want to reconnect with me or meet, but even if not, I really want to ask you for help. Despite the blood connection, Julia remained a complete stranger in all respects for Elle. However, Elle decided to trust her and tell her everything. The message turned out to be long. The girl explained that nothing could be accomplished without Julia's involvement. You found me just to ask for help. Elle read her mom's new messages with a somehow sad and disappointed tone. No. Honestly, I wanted to do this for a long time, but I didn't know how you would react to it. But even if it's a negative reaction, I'm asking you as a person to help me with our matter. Is the person in the photo on your profile you? Julia suddenly asked. After receiving an affirmative answer, she wrote to the girl, You are very beautiful, thank you. It seemed like Elle's embarrassment was conveyed directly through the messages. I remember you as a little baby. You had such big ears. I was afraid they would stay that way for life, but now they seem fine. Elle was completely perplexed. She didn't know how to respond to such messages. Julia's mood quickly changed. In the photo, they are just covered by hair. The girl replied, I'm willing to help you, but such questions are not resolved through messages. Moreover, it seems I need to explain something to you in person. Elle stood in a quiet alley, nervously holding her purse and peering around the corner of the house. They had agreed to meet with her mom near a small cozy cafe. Elle decided not to show herself deliberately, but to observe her from a distance. Although Julia was already 3 minutes late, Elle was about to text her and ask if she would arrive soon when suddenly she saw a woman in a long skirt appearing next to the cafe. It was this skirt that Julia mentioned as a recognition sign for their meeting place. A wave of cold water seemed to wash over the girl. It was challenging to convey all the emotions that filled her at that moment. She was seeing her mom in person for the first time. Julia stood with her back to Elle. Her hair was exactly like Elle's. The height was approximately the same too. And at first glance, she seemed to be a very kind person, not as grim as it seemed in their correspondence. Of course, unless you take into account the fact that she abandoned her own child and left everything to fate. An ordinary person hardly ever contemplated how they would evaluate their own mother when meeting her for the first time in their life. Elle, on the other hand, had thought about it many times. She pondered and even imagined these moments before falling asleep. Our thoughts materialize. Elle remembered the words. She didn't expect them to materialize so quickly. Elle tightened her grip on her purse and decisively walked towards her mother. As if sensing her, Julia abruptly turned around, and they locked eyes and froze. Elle stared at her mom for a long time, examining the green eyes, straight nose, and lips. The woman did the same. "Hello." Elle's voice was the first to break the silence. "Hi," Julia said. Elle just shrugged uncertainly, and they entered the cafe. Elle ordered tea and dessert for herself, while Julia chose an alcoholic cocktail, seemingly anticipating a difficult conversation. Awkwardness, heart-to-heart talks, and tears were all gathered in it. She learned a lot of new things about herself and her family. "Elle, I understand your feelings," Julia began hesitantly. "I feel terribly guilty in front of you. I know it's challenging to explain, but let me try." And Elle allowed her. "In general, it so happened that for several generations, women in our family raised children alone. My grandmother lost her husband. My mom's partner left." She spoke. "So Miranda, my mom, the one you asked about, was afraid that the same would happen to me. She wanted me to get married at a conscious age and build a strong family. So, she tried to protect me, shield me from socializing, especially with boys. Usually, children of such mothers end up in trouble. That's why I felt like I was sitting in a cage, dreaming of getting away from my parents' house as soon as possible. In the 10th grade, secretly from my mom, I met a guy, your father." Elle could see that the woman was saying this through pain. "First love. I thought he was the best person on earth. Everything happened very quickly. We were planning a happy future together, doing repairs in our not yet existing house. Meanwhile, my relationship with my mom was deteriorating. She started noticing that I was hiding something. But I was blindly in love with David. I was sure that with him, everything would be better than with anyone else. Only it turned out that all his promises were nothing more than empty words. My mom was right. I faced the same fate as all the women in our family. When I got pregnant, I was just finishing high school. I expected David to be happy about it, but he disappeared immediately. He couldn't even come up with a reasonable excuse." Tears suddenly welled up in the woman's eyes. "I was afraid to go to my mom. I knew she would judge me, and it would only get worse for me. She worked a lot, so somehow I managed to hide the pregnancy. As soon as you were born, I placed you in an orphanage. I understood that I would suffer because of this for the rest of my life. But I had no money, no education, no support. I cried every day for several months and completely cut off communication with my mom. Every day, I thought that I betrayed the dearest person in my life. You, Elle. But I had already ruined my life, and I was afraid I would do the same to you if I kept you with me. Your life would have been much worse with me." It was very painful for Elle, but she didn't understand who it was more painful for, herself or her mom. At some point, she wanted to scream, "You don't know what I've been through." But Elle held back and continued to listen. "You know, I tried to help as best as I could. Always watched you from a distance, sent small gifts, the ones I could afford. A few years later, I left the city, thinking I couldn't endure it for a lifetime. I tried to convince myself that you were no longer my child. But my heart was breaking, and I came back. Time almost didn't dull the pain. Always, even when something joyful happened in life, there was a stone on my heart. Then my mom died too. I never reconciled with her. I was left all alone." Julia's voice trembled, and Elle suddenly noticed that she was crying too. "My Elle, is it really you after all these years? Forgive me for everything. Forgive me if I, The woman began speaking in disjointed fragments. "Wait. Don't cry. I'm here. I'm right here, Mommy." Somehow, the resentment disappeared from Elle's heart, and she approached and hugged her mom. It was strange how the dearest person had always been so close, and Elle didn't even know it. But now she suddenly realized that the moment she had dreamed of and longed for all her life had come. Elle found her mom and would never lose her again. Julia held her daughter close, and Elle could hear the beating of her heart. "I dreamed of doing this my whole life," she whispered. The story could have ended on this happy note, but Elle and her friends had one more unfinished business. "Both of you, get out of my office." "Elle, you're fired. Pack your things and get out," Riley yelled, his face turning red. Elle had never seen him so angry and intimidating. "Don't yell at my daughter." Julia stood with a calm expression, piercing the old man with her gaze. "Better answer my question, or else." The will and other necessary documents lay on the table before him. "Or else, I'll sue. You perfectly understand that the estate will be awarded to the rightful owners, not an imposter. It seems you already have some problems with the police." The items from the drawer were indeed stolen, so his situation was quite precarious, as was his granddaughter's. "You're threatening me. A stranger comes and wants to take away my property. Try it. What do your papers prove?" He suddenly grabbed the will and tore it apart. "You're free. No paper, no problems," Elle screamed. But her mom didn't flinch. "This is a copy of the authentic document." She sighed wearily. "As you wish. Today I am filing a lawsuit." It was pitiful to look at Riley, but within a couple of months, Elle stopped encountering his gloomy face in the corridors and ceased wearing the maid uniform. The estate was awarded to its rightful owners, and Elle and her mom were finally reunited. Together, they gradually prepared for the new school year. For the first time in so many years, Elle realized that she was absolutely happy. Meanwhile, it seemed that a dark streak had begun for Riley and his family. Peace reigned in the mansion. No one poisoned anyone, and things stopped disappearing. Repairs were gradually carried out everywhere. In Elle's former boss's office, she planned to create a small relaxation area. New paths were laid in the garden, and a personal path to Mr. Knight's house was established. In short, life improved, and not just for Elle. Passing by the dining room, she noticed Asa and Colin kissing around the corner. Mrs. Rubb's son finally arrived, and, by the way, he gave Elle a bouquet of flowers and asked for her phone number while staying at her mom's. Elle didn't forget to find that leather album and write on a new, clean page. No matter how things unfold, one day the moment will come when everything accidentally falls into place at the right time, in the right place. And millions of roads will converge at one point, and everything will finally